The jade pendant cracked in her fingers, and blood trickled down the white silk and onto the marble floor of the arena. Han Yunhua ripped the seal of protection from his chest in a single motion. It was as easy as when, 3 months ago, she had wiped the wound on his shoulder with that same handkerchief. The very same handkerchief she was now using to dab the peach juice from her lips. Son Cha Jihun knelt before the arena, filled with the cackling novices of the bronze tyrant, and watched as shards of jade fell into the pool of his own blood. Yunhua said he was an amusing toy. She said that Che Meyer had offered 3 villages and the Lazuri mine in exchange for him. She said that politics has no room for sentimentality. She spoke in the same voice she'd used to whisper in his ear a month ago when she was bandaging his wound after the skirmish in the wasteland. Meyer stood nearby. Amethyst tear. 52,000 drops of lazuri. The counter on her wrist glowed so brightly that it cast a violet glow on the floor. She spat at his feet and said they'd send him to Beko. Let him haul bones around until the demons devour him. The crowd laughed even louder. The bronze novices, with their barely glowing marks on their wrists, cackled at the man dressed in a concubine's silk. At an empty vessel, at expendable material. Jihun raised his head. Blood was trickling down his ribs beneath the fabric, but he didn't press down on the wound. He looked into Yunhua's pupil. Not her eyes, her pupil. And he said quietly and evenly that she should remember the taste of this peach, because it was the last thing she'd ever eat as a commander. Yunhua blinked. For just a split second. Then she laughed and waved her hand at the escort. 2 guards in heavy breastplates grabbed him by the elbows and dragged him toward the gate. The marble of the arena became the mud of the road. The concubine's silk became the rags of an exile. The seal of patronage, which for 3 months had made him the property of the Red Chrysanthemum clan and his only protection against murder, lay in shards in a pool of blood. Without it, he became a nobody. Worse than a nobody. A man without a clan in Hyungran is nothing but walking meat. The escort led him along the road for 4 days. They fed him rice porridge with worms once a day. On the 3rd day, one of the guards struck him in the ribs with the shaft of his spear simply because he could. Jihun fell. He got back up. He memorized the man's face. In his past life, he had spent 3 years working in active combat zones. He knew what it meant to endure. He knew that endurance was not a weakness, but an investment. Every blow, every insult, every spit, he placed them in a separate box inside his head. Carefully, methodically. Just as he used to file intelligence reports at headquarters when preparing an operation. Beko greeted him with a smell. Rotting wood, wet clay, the smoke of cheap coal, and something sweet wafting from behind the wall. Beyond the wall lay the Grey Crow's wasteland, and the sweet scent came from there. That was the scent of the scavenger demons, the White Tiger Garrison. The name was a mockery. A tiger implied strength, but in Beko there was nothing but discarded bones. 47 female warriors. Average rank? Bronze 2. 180 drops of azure. The marks on their wrists glowed faintly with a dull reddish light. In any normal garrison, the average rank started at silver. Here, no one had ever seen a silver. He was dumped at the gate like a sack. The guards turned and walked away without looking back. He lay in the mud by the palisade, staring at the gray sky. Not a single person approached. Then he heard footsteps. Light, precise, military. He turned his head. Standing before him was a girl in a tattered breastplate with a crack running across the entire left plate. The mark on her wrist glowed slightly brighter than the others. Maybe 220, maybe 230 drops. Bronze 2, the upper limit. She looked at the empty vessel brand on his neck. She looked at the blood dried on the silk. She looked him in the eyes. And she saluted. Fist to her chest. Her back was straight. As one officer to another. Yoon Se-ryeon, lieutenant of the Beko garrison, daughter of a disgraced commander. The only one who treated him like a human being. He remembered that too, but in a different box. She helped him to his feet, led him across the courtyard, past the barracks from which wary eyes watched them. 47 pairs of eyes. 47 female warriors whom the world had written off as expendable. She showed him a tiny room by the wall, straw on the floor, a crack in the wall through which the wind blew from the wasteland.
"This is your place," she said. "Wagon porter, kitchen, and storeroom." He nodded, sat down on the straw, closed his eyes, and for the first time since the jade had cracked in Yunhua's fingers, he allowed himself to think of something other than the pain, of the map. His 3 months with the Red Chrysanthemum clan had not been in vain. He had listened, memorized, calculated. He knew the location of every garrison along the border. He knew the supply routes. He knew that Baekho stood at the only narrow pass between the wasteland and the southern highway. He knew that this pass was unguarded because no one considered Baekho worthy of protection. And he knew that through this pass, in 2 to 3 weeks, the Silver Tear's demon boar would pass through this pass. The Red Chrysanthemum's intelligence had been tracking its migration even while Jihun was still sitting in his silk cage. 3,200 drops of azure, Silver Tear. To kill such a beast, you'd need a regiment of 200 female warriors, with casualties amounting to up to a third of the force. He had 47 bronze-ranked warriors. He opened his eyes. He looked at the crack in the wall. The wind from the wasteland smelled of Swedish rot.
Sun Jihun ran his hand over his chest, where the seal of protection had been just 3 hours ago. The wound was already drying up. The scar would remain. He wanted it to remain. Every morning he would see it and remember the taste of peach on Han Yonghua's lips. And every morning his promise would grow stronger. But first, the boar. 47 against the Silver Tyrant. Not a single one of them must die, because every death under his command would searingly pain him. He didn't yet know why. He didn't know where this knowledge came from. He simply felt a black chill run down his spine. Something was stirring where the warrior's azure had crystallized. Something that shouldn't be in the body of an empty vessel. He wasn't thinking about that yet. He was thinking about the boar. About the 47 women outside the barracks walls. About how, in his past world, people had been at war for 5,000 years longer than here. And about how Han Yonhua had made the one mistake that must never be made. She had sent a scout to the front lines and thought it was a punishment. He didn't sleep his first night in Baekho. He was counting. The small room by the wall smelled of dampness and rotten straw, but Jihun didn't notice the smell. He traced lines with his finger on the earthen floor that only he could see. The garrison walls, the gate, 2 hills to the north, a ravine 300 paces to the west, the bamboo grove beyond the ravine, the direction of the wind. He didn't know where this ability had come from. When he closed his eyes and thought about the terrain around Baekho, a map would appear before his inner eye. Not just a map, a thermal map. He could see where the ground was softer, where the air was warmer from underground burrows, where the wind swirled between the rocks and created a blind spot. He opened his eyes. He erased the lines on the floor. He stood up and went out into the courtyard. It was still dark. The sentry in the watchtower looked out at him with lazy contempt and turned away. An empty vessel. A wagon driver. Not worth paying attention to. He walked along the wall. He felt the logs. 3 of the 6 support posts were rotten at the base. The palisade on the north side was held up by nothing more than a promise. The moat in front of the gate was half filled with trash. He found the storeroom. The lock was broken. Inside were sacks of grain, 3 of which were already moldy. The spearheads were rusty. Ropes, bamboo poles, a barrel of lamp oil 1/3 full, and crossbows, 6 of them, all with broken cocking mechanisms. He picked one up. He turned it over in his hands. The design was primitive, 14th century level, maybe 13th. In his former life, these were the kind of things you'd find in museums. He put the crossbow back. When the sun rose and the garrison began to wake up, he was sitting by the kitchen, peeling a turnip. A supply porter. That was his job. 47 female warriors were marching out to formation. He watched. 3 seconds for each one. He didn't know why exactly 3 seconds, but during that time, something inside him read everything. How they stood, where they shifted their weight, where their muscles were tense, where they were relaxed. Right-handers, left-handers. Who had an old knee injury? Who had a habit of dropping their left elbow when swinging? Cold reading. That's what he called it to himself. In 3 seconds, he could see right through a fighter. Yoon Se-ryong lined up the squad on the parade ground. She ordered them to warm up. Jihun peeled turnips and watched. The 47 female warriors moved out of sync. Not a single well-rehearsed combination. Each was striking on her own. He saw 6 or 7 competent fighters. Se-ryong was the best of them. Fast, tough, but she attacked like a dueler, not like a squad commander. The rest were worse. Some were significantly worse. He noticed one girl at the end of the line who was moving slower than everyone else. The mark on her wrist was barely glowing. Bronze 1. Maybe 90 drops. Maybe less. But her eyes. Her eyes moved differently from the others. She wasn't following the instructor. She was memorizing. He asked the cook who she was. Kim Ah-rim, the cook replied. The weakest in the garrison. She's useless, but she remembers everything she sees. Jihun nodded and continued peeling the turnip. By noon, he knew the status of every fighter in the garrison. He knew their weaknesses. He knew their potential. And he knew that 47 bronze warriors, under the right command, were worth more than a regiment of 200 scattered silver warriors. That evening, he found Yoon Se-ryong. She was sitting by the campfire, sharpening her sword.
He sat down beside her. She didn't shoo him away. He told her that in 2 weeks, a demon boar would emerge near Baekho. She froze. She looked at him. "How do you know?" she asked. He said he'd heard it in the Red Chrysanthemum clan while he was still being held at Yanwei. Intelligence had confirmed the migration. The boar was heading south through the gorge. Baekho stood in its path. Se-ryong turned pale. 3,200 drops of azure, she said. Silver tear. They'll kill us. He shook his head. He said they wouldn't kill them if she did what he told her to do. She looked at him for a long time. At the brand of the empty vessel on his neck. At the dried blood on his shirt. At his calm eyes. Then she asked why she should listen to a wagon porter. He replied that in 2 weeks she would have a choice, to listen to him or to bury her own people. She gripped the hilt of her sword so tightly that her knuckles turned white. But she didn't strike, and she didn't leave. He began to speak. Wolf pits, sharpened bamboo, crisscrossing barriers, deadwood and fires set downwind, narrow passages where a boar's size would be its weakness, not its strength. He spoke for 20 minutes.
Not a single unnecessary word. Every sentence was an order. When he finished, Se-ryong was silent. Then she said it sounded like a plan from a real command post, not like the ramblings of a supply officer. He replied that she was right. He wasn't a supply officer. The next day, Se-ryong assembled the garrison on the parade ground. She announced that intelligence had reported the approach of the demon boar, Silver Tear. Panic broke out instantly. Someone shouted that they had to run. Someone began to cry. One of the older female warriors said they should send a messenger to the neighboring garrison for help. Se-ryong replied that the neighboring garrison was a 3-day journey away. The boar would be here in 12 days. Then she said she had a plan. Jihun stood by the kitchen with a bucket of water, listening as she repeated word for word what he had told her last night. His plan. Her voice. That's how it should be. He's invisible. She's in the spotlight. After the roll call, another female warrior approached him. Short, wiry. Her hands were covered in burns and calluses. Cho Do-hee, a former engineering technician. Stripped of her rank for heresy, she had tried to improve the standard crossbow. For that, she was expelled from the Ice Crane clan and exiled to Baekho. She said she'd heard about the pits and ambushes. She said she could do better. He asked what exactly. She showed him a sketch on a scrap of cloth. A bamboo slingshot with a rope-based tension mechanism. Primitive, but the principle was sound. He looked at the sketch for 3 seconds. Then he took a piece of charcoal and adjusted the angle. He added a counterweight. He removed an extra link. Do-hee stared at the revised sketch. "How do you know this?" she asked. He replied that it didn't matter. What mattered was that she needed to make 6 of these in 11 days. She nodded. Her eyes were ablaze. 12 days until the boar hunt. Jihun assigned tasks through Seryong. The first squad is digging pits. The second is cutting bamboo and sharpening it. The third is felling deadwood and stacking it in 2 lines downwind. The fourth is stretching ropes between the trees at foot level. Do-hee is assembling slingshots. Kim A-rim received a separate assignment. He approached her personally. He told her she needed to walk the perimeter of Baeko within a radius of 1,000 steps and memorize every stone, every turn, every slope. She looked at him in surprise. No one had ever given her tasks before. She was too weak for combat. 90 drops of azure. Bronze 1. Rock bottom. But her memory was flawless. He could tell by the way her eyes moved during roll call. She memorized visually, not through muscle memory. A walking archive. 3 days later, she reported back. Every stone, every turn. He listened and sketched a 3-dimensional map in his head. The thermal markings matched her data 90%. The remaining 10% were caves he didn't know about, burrows, underground passages. That changed everything. He revised the plan. He shifted 2 survey lines. He added a 3rd arson point. He filled in one of the pits and dug a new one 40 paces to the left. Seryong asked why he was changing it if the plan was already good. He replied that a good plan is one that changes before the battle, not during it. On the 8th day, Do-hee brought the first slingshot. It was crude. It yellow. But the stone flew 3 times farther from it than from a standard sling. The bamboo cracked with every shot. The second prototype was better. The third one didn't crack anymore. By the 11th day, 5 slingshots were ready. The 6th didn't work out. The rope snapped. 5 will be enough, said Jihun. The night before the battle, he went outside the walls. Alone. Unarmed. A supply porter was strolling near the wasteland. The sentry in the watchtower didn't even call out to him. He stood on the crest of the hill and closed his eyes. The thermal marker flashed. He sensed a boar. A warm spot. Huge. 2 kilometers to the north. Moving slowly. Devouring everything in its path. 3,200 drops of azure. Silver tear. A beast the size of a house that had wiped out regiments of 200 fighters. Jihun stood on the hill and gazed into the darkness. A black chill pulsed down his spine. Quiet. Steady. Something inside him was counting. He didn't interfere. The earth trembled at dawn. Jihun was standing by the kitchen with a ladle in his hand when the first tremor passed through the soles of his feet. The boar was moving faster than he'd expected. Not 12 days. 11. It was a good thing he'd revised the plan on the 3rd day. He dropped the ladle and went to Seryong. She was already standing on the watchtower, looking north. Dust was rising above the tree line, a column of dust 20 paces wide. The beast was mowing down the forest like grass. Seryong climbed down. Her face was pale, but her hands didn't tremble. She looked at him. He nodded. Just as planned. She ran toward the barracks and began shouting orders. The Baeko garrison sprang to life. The 47 female warriors of the bronze tier scattered to the positions they had been drilling for 10 days straight. The first squad took up positions behind the pits. The second took up positions on the flanks near the lines of deadwood. The third spread out among the rope traps. 5 Do-hee slingshots stood on the hill behind the second line of trenches. Jihun climbed the watchtower. The sentry looked at him indignantly. A supply officer had no business being here. He paid no attention. He closed his eyes. The thermal image flashed before his inner vision, and he saw everything. 47 dots at their positions, bright, alive, warm, and 1 enormous spot to the north. Scorching, dense. It was moving like an avalanche. 3,200 drops of azure, concentrated into a single mass the size of a barn. Fangs as long as an arm. Hide that a bronze warrior's ordinary blade couldn't pierce. He opened his eyes. He turned to the sentry and told her to leave the watchtower. She began to argue. He looked at her with that gaze that, in a past life, had forced sergeants to obey orders before their brains had time to process any doubt. She left. He remained alone at the top and began to give orders. His voice was soft, steady. He knew that Seryong was standing close enough below to hear him. She heard him and repeated his words at the top of her lungs. His mouth, her scream. The boar emerged from the forest. The crackling of the trees ceased, and there was a silence that comes only before a clash. The beast stopped in the clearing. Its snout was covered in blood. Its eyes were cloudy and yellow. Steam rose from its nostrils. It was bigger than Jihun had expected. Much bigger. Not a barn, a house. A 2-story one. Its hide was covered with black growths as hard as stone. A bronze blade would shatter against something like that. Several female warriors on the flanks began to retreat.
Jihun saw this on the thermal display.
3 dots shifted backward. Panic. He told Seryong the names. She shouted them out. She ordered them to return to their positions. Her voice was like the crack of a whip. They returned. The boar moved toward Beko, straight ahead, right through the first line of pits. It stepped on a pit covered by branches with its left front leg and sank up to its shoulder. Bamboo stakes pierced its underbelly. A roar. Such a roar that blood began to flow from the ears of the nearest female warriors. The beast jerked and wrenched its leg out of the pit. The stakes snapped in the wound. Blood gushed onto the ground. Black, thick, foul-smelling. But it kept going, limping on its left leg. Slower. Jihun kept track. Its speed had dropped by 1/3. Good. The boar had bypassed the second pit. It wasn't stupid. The demons of Silver Tier possessed the rudiments of intelligence. It skirted the pit and turned toward the passage between the 2 hills, exactly where Jihun was leading it. A passage 15 paces wide. Rope traps at foot level, hidden in the grass. The boar entered the passage and the ropes snapped taut. It didn't fall. It was too heavy.
But he stumbled.
He lost his momentum. At that moment, Jihun said one word. Fire. Seryong shouted. The second squad on the flanks set fire to the dry brush on both sides. The wind was blowing from the north. Jihun had checked it 3 times that night. The flames shot along the lines of stacked branches straight into the passage. Not at the boar. Right next to it. The boar didn't burn. Its hide was too thick. But the smoke filled its nostrils and eyes. It bellowed and began to thrash about in the passage. Blind. Lost. Now, said Jihun. Slingshots. 5 of Dohi's slingshots fired simultaneously from the hill. Fist-sized stones flew into the beast's snout. The first hit its eye, the second, its ear, the third, its open maw. The boar bellowed and turned toward the hill, exposing its flank. That was exactly what they needed. The third squad struck from ambush. 12 female warriors with spears drove their weapons into the boar's flank, where the bamboo stakes had already pierced its hide. A blue glow flared on their blades. Bronze strength, but 12 simultaneous strikes at a single point. The boar collapsed to its knees. Blood gushed from its side. It tried to stand.
Jihun saw on the thermal display how the heat in the beast's body was fading. The dots on his map flickered. 47 female warriors in position, all alive, all in place. He glanced at the clock in his mind. 4 minutes had passed. The boar stood up, but slowly. His left leg wouldn't hold him. His side was drenched in blood. One eye had been gouged out by a stone from a slingshot. He turned toward the gates of Beko and moved forward. Instinct. He was following the scent of people, the scent of life. 47 warm bodies. Jihun had been waiting for this, the last line of defense. Seryong and the first squad stood before the gates. 14 female warriors. Seryong in the lead, sword held in both hands. The mark on her wrist glowed. 230 drops of azure against 3,200. Madness. But Jihun saw what no one else could see. The boar was limping. The boar was bleeding from 6 wounds. The boar was blind in one eye. The boar was walking through smoke and flames, and his lungs were full of soot. Of the 3,200 drops, perhaps 800 remained combat-ready. Maybe 600. He was silver only on paper. Now he was a wounded beast. Jihun told Sejong where to strike. The 3rd rib on the right.
That's where the stakes had penetrated the deepest. Sejong nodded. She dropped her shield, both hands on the hilt. The boar was 10 paces away. 5. 2. She stepped aside at the last moment. The fangs whizzed past her. The blade struck precisely the 3rd rib on the right and went all the way to the spine. The azure light flared so brightly that Jihun, up in the watchtower, had to squint. The boar fell. 6 minutes from its first roar to its fall. Silence. 47 warriors stood and stared at the dead demon of the silver throne. Then Jihun saw something unusual on the thermal display. 47 dots on the field began to pulse, simultaneously, brighter, hotter. The marks on their wrists lit up, all 47, simultaneously. He watched as the numbers rose. 180 became 400. 400 became 550. 550 became 620. Bronze 3. All of them. At once. Yoon Se-ryung stood over the boar's carcass and looked at her wrist. The mark was pulsing. 230 became 380. 380 became 510. 510 became 640. Bronze 3. The upper limit. Almost iron. She raised her head and looked at the tower. At the supply porter standing at the top, looking down. Their eyes met. She didn't smile. She nodded. He nodded in return. And he felt a black chill pulsing down his spine. Something inside him was absorbing it. 1% from every enemy killed. Silently. Invisibly. Without a trace in the chronicle. His counter, which didn't exist, moved from 0. 320 drops of azure. Bronze 2. No one knew. No one saw. He wasn't going to show it. But the sensation was like a glass of ice-cold water after 3 days of thirst. Outside, deadwood was burning in Baekho, and a dead boar lay in a pool of black blood. A supply porter climbed down from the watchtower and headed toward the kitchen. It was time to prepare dinner. 47 female warriors had earned hot rice today. The demon boar of silver tier had arrived a day early. Jihun commanded the battle from the watchtower through Sejong. The battle lasted 6 minutes. 0 casualties. All 47 female warriors rose to bronze 3 and Sejong approached iron. Jihun's hidden counter moved to 320 KL. No one knows that a man was in command. On the 3rd day after the battle with the boar, an inspection squad rode through the gates of Baekho. 3 female riders in polished armor on horses that cost more than the entire garrison. Leading the way was a woman with a cold expression and a mark on her wrist that glowed bright blue. Sapphire tier 18,000 drops of azure. Commander Baek Solya, inspector of the border garrisons. Jihun was cleaning fish by the kitchen when they rode into the courtyard. He didn't look up, but 3 seconds were enough. His cold reading worked instantly. Solya moved with economy. Not a single superfluous movement. Weight on her right leg. Accustomed to a heavy blade. A scar on her left arm from a lapis burn. So she'd been in battle with an amethyst opponent and survived. Dangerous, but not an enemy. Not yet. Solya dismounted and surveyed the courtyard. She saw the carcass of a boar being butchered against the wall. She saw the markings on the warrior's wrists. Bronze 3. That's all. She stopped. Jihun saw her eyes narrow. The Sapphire commander walked through the ranks of warriors that Sejong had lined up. Silently. She looked at each one. At the markings. At their weapons. At their stances. At Dohi's slings folded against the wall. Then she turned to Sejong. She asked who had commanded the battle. Sejong replied that it was her. Sola looked at her for 3 seconds, just as long as Jihun spent on a cold reading. Perhaps the Sapphires had their own version. Then she asked where Seryong had learned the tactics of crossfire positions. Seryong didn't blink. She replied that she'd learned them from books. Sola said that crossfire positions weren't mentioned in a single Hyungran textbook. Nowhere. Not in a single clan archive. She had checked. The silence on the parade ground grew thick. Seryong remained silent. Jihun was cleaning fish. Sola turned and walked toward the Hall of Chronicles, the small mirrored screen in the garrison commander's office. She called up the data. Jihun couldn't see the screen, but he could tell from the thermal readings that Sola's pulse had quickened. She was looking at the growth chart. 47 bronze warriors had raised their scores overnight, all at once. The growth curve wasn't just fast, it was vertical. That doesn't happen. Solia left the office with a face that had grown even colder. She ordered her escorts to wait and walked through the garrison alone. She inspected the pits outside the walls. Traces of deadwood, scorched earth in the passage between the hills, rope tripwires, the remains of bamboo stakes stained with the boar's black blood. Zhuhong watched from the kitchen. She walked the perimeter for an hour and a half. When she returned to the courtyard, she went straight to the kitchen. She stood in front of him. He was holding a fish in one hand and a knife in the other. She looked at the mark of an empty vessel on his neck, then at his hands, then at the fish. "You clean fish the way you clear a battlefield," she said. "Sectors, economy of movement." He replied that a fish was just a fish. She didn't smile. She asked where he was from. He replied that he was from the Red Chrysanthemum clan, formerly owned by Han Yanhua. Sola nodded. She said she knew the story. Property sold off and exiled. An empty vessel. Then she paused and said that empty vessels don't build cross checkpoints. He didn't reply. She turned and walked away. By evening, the inspection squad had left Beko. Sola left without saying another word to Seryong or anyone else. But Jihun knew she would return. And he knew that right now, she was heading not to headquarters but to the Hall of Chronicles in Chongryong to check the figures. This was both good and bad at the same time. Good because Sola was not an ally of Cho Mi-rae. Bad because the Sapphire Commander's attention to Beko would inevitably reach the ears of those higher up. And higher up stood the Council of Nine and the High Priestess. Jihun washed the fish scales off his hands and went to see Seryong. He said they needed to speed things up. They needed the next battle, the next gain. Before the attention from above turned into a strike, Seryong asked where to find the next enemy. He replied, the Grey Crow's wasteland. 3 outposts of scavenger demons in the northwest. Each is guarded by a squad of bronze demons led by a single iron commander. A total of about 1,500 drops per outpost. The bronze warriors can't handle them on their own, but 47 bronze warriors, 3 of whom are active, operating as a single unit is a different matter. Seryong said that entering the wasteland without headquarters permission was a violation of the regulations. He replied that the regulations were written for garrisons that had support. Beko had nothing. If they waited for permission, they'd only end up being disbanded. She thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she came to his small room and said she agreed. He didn't sleep that night. He was making plans. The first checkpoint stood on a rocky ledge above the gorge. There was only one approach, a narrow one. It was an ideal defensive position for a conventional assault. Jihun wasn't planning a conventional assault. He called Kim Arim over and asked her about the caves she'd found while mapping the area. Arim closed her eyes and began to describe them. Every turn, every narrowing, every slope. Her photographic memory worked like a camera. One of the caves opened up 200 paces south of the ledge, behind the checkpoint. He asked if the entrance was wide enough for a person to pass through. Arim replied that 2 people could walk side by side. He ran his hand over the scar on his chest. A habit. Every time he thought about his next move, his fingers found the scar where the seal had been. A reminder. A promise. Han Yanhua is sitting in her estate right now and doesn't even remember his name. She'll remember soon. Within a week, the first checkpoint fell. Aram led the strike force through the caves. 8 female warriors under Seryong's command emerged from behind the checkpoint. At the same time, the main force launched a diversionary attack from the front. The Iron Demon commander threw all his forces into the narrow passageway. He turned his back on the caves. 8 blades struck simultaneously. The battle was over in 3 minutes. 0 casualties. The marks on their wrists flared up again. 620 became 750. A black chill pulsed down Jihun's spine. His hidden counter had passed 500. Bronze 3. 2 weeks later, the second and third checkpoints fell. The second was taken with a classic ambush. Do-hee blew up the third one with a homemade mine made from a barrel of oil and bamboo splinters. Jihun had given her the idea. Gunpowder didn't exist in Hyongran, but oil bombs worked perfectly. The marks on the Baekho warriors burned ever brighter. The average rank rose to Iron 1, 700 kapel. Yoon Se-ryong surpassed the 1,200 mark. Iron 2. The growth continued. And somewhere in the capital of Cheongryong, in the Hall of Chronicles, the numbers for a small border garrison were creeping up the graph so fast that it looked like a system error. Commander Baek Sola sat in her office, staring at the graph. She was drinking tea, and her hand holding the cup didn't. But Jihun would have known from the thermal readings that her pulse had risen. "Someone is training them," she said quietly. "And that someone is more dangerous than 3 Reds combined." She set down her cup and began writing a report. Not to Border Defense Headquarters, to her personal archive. For now, just her personal archive. Inspector Baek Sola of the Sapphire Tower arrived in Baekho and noticed the abnormal spike. She suspected Jihun, but didn't expose him. Over the next few weeks, the garrison cleared 3 checkpoints in the wasteland. The average rank rose to Iron 1, and Yoon Se-ryong reached 1,200 KL. Jihun's hidden counter had surpassed 500. Sol-ah began keeping a personal dossier on Baekho. Im Ha-in appeared in Baekho at dawn on the 3rd month. She stood at the gate, soaked from the rain, with a cut eyebrow and wearing armor from which the clan emblem had been torn out. Holes and jagged edges remained where the emblem had been. A former novice of the Moonblade clan, of the Che Meyer clan. A guard shouted down that there was a vagrant at the gate. Se-ryong went out to take a look. Jihun stood by the kitchen and watched. 3 seconds were enough. Ha-in moved like a fighter accustomed to dual weapons. Her left hand searched for a second blade that wasn't there. Her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, ready to lunge. An old scar on her forearm from a training sword. The Moonblade style. He recognized it from the mental notes he'd kept back when he was still with the Red Chrysanthemum clan. Yeonhwa had mentioned Meyer's technique several times in his presence. She treated him like a piece of furniture. She didn't hesitate to discuss tactics over an empty vessel. Hayeon told Se-ryong that she'd been expelled. Meyer herself had ordered her to be thrown out. The reason? Haein dared to suggest a change to the training protocol. Myri interpreted this as insubordination. She ripped off her emblem in front of the entire squad. She threw it onto the road. Se-ryong looked at Jihun across the parade ground, a question in her eyes. He tilted his chin up slightly. "Yes, take her in." Se-ryong let Ha-in into the garrison. Jihun waited 3 days before speaking to her. He watched her for 3 days. Ha-in ate eagerly but neatly. She trained with the others. She remained silent. The mark on her wrist read 430 drops. Bronze 3. A low rank for a former novice of the Amethyst clan. So Meyer had deliberately kept her down. She hadn't let her grow. She'd stifled her. On the 4th day, he sat down next to her at dinner. He introduced himself. A supply porter. She looked at the brand on his neck and turned away. He said he knew the inner workings of the Moonblade clan. She froze. He named 3 officers from Meyer's inner circle. He described the layout of the barracks. He named the number of female warriors in the Strike 100. 103, not around 100, because Meyer is superstitious and keeps 3 extra warriors on the roster. Haynes slowly turned to face him. "Where did you get that?" she asked. He replied that it didn't matter. Something else was important. He asked if she wanted Cho Meyer to pay. Hane's eyes went glassy, not from tears, but from rage that had been bottled up for so long it had turned to ice. She replied that she did. He nodded. He said that in that case, she needed to tell him everything. The Moonblade's intelligence reports, the signal fire system, patrol routes, weak points in the defense of Mir's estate, the guard shift schedule, favorite tactical formations, Mir's habits in battle, everything. Hane spoke for 4 hours. Jihun memorized it all. He didn't take notes. Records can be found. Memory cannot be searched. By midnight, he had a complete picture of the Moonblade clan. Every crack, every weakness, every habit. Mir relied on numerical superiority and brute force. Zero tactical flexibility. Virtually no reconnaissance. She was accustomed to winning through sheer numbers and rank. Against an equal opponent, she had only one tactic: a frontal assault with the entire 100-strong force. Against a tactically superior opponent? Nothing. Jihun allowed himself the faintest of smiles, his first in 3 months. For the next 2 weeks, the Beko garrison trained according to a new scheme. Through Sereon, Jihun introduced the concept of combat units, trios. Every 3 warriors worked as a single unit. One attacks, one provides cover, one brings up the rear. An ambush pattern, a wedge pattern, a feigned retreat with a turnaround pattern. He drilled it into their minds, literally. When he explained yet another formation to Seryong and she relayed it to the squad, something happened. The female warriors who heard his plan through Seryong and carried it out in mock combat moved differently. Faster, more precisely, more cleanly, as if the pattern were being recorded not in their muscles, but in the azure itself. Doctrine transfer. That's what he called it. A ready-made combat pattern that he transmitted to his subordinates via the command link. They executed it at a level above their rank. Bronze 3 moved like iron. Iron like silver. Command resonance. A multiplier. That's why their rise in the Chronicle was so rapid. Not because they were more talented than others, but because every enemy killed according to his tactical scheme yielded a triple increase in drops. In the 5th week of the 3rd month, reconnaissance detected movement in the south. Ha-In was the first to report it. She recognized the signal fires, the Moonblade. Meyer sent out a reconnaissance squad, 12 warriors of the silver tier. Average rank, 2,800 drops. They were heading toward Beko. Jihun asked Hane why. Hane replied that Meyer had heard about the boar. The squad was wiped out by 47 bronze-ranked warriors without any casualties. The rumor had reached the clan. Meyer wanted to verify it, to see if the rumor was true, and if her former possession, which she had discarded in Beko, was somehow connected to this. Jihun ran his hand over his scar. It was too soon. He wanted 2 more months to prepare. But the enemy doesn't ask when it's convenient. He gathered his staff, Seryong, Do-hee, Aryum, and Ha-in. 4 women in the small room of a wagon porter, a candle on the floor, a map drawn in charcoal on a board. 12 silvers, he said. Their average rank is twice as high as ours, but they're heading for our home, and they don't know we're waiting for them. He began to lay out the plan. Hein knew the Moonblade's reconnaissance protocol. They move in 2 groups of 6. The first group consists of scouts. The second is the strike force. The scouts take up their positions and give the signal. The strike force enters 5 minutes after the signal, always, without exception. Meyer hadn't changed the protocol in 15 years. Jihun smiled, not warmly, coldly. He said they would intercept the signal. They'd send a false one. The strike squad would walk right into a trap at the signal. And the first reconnaissance squad would be taken out quietly while they were waiting for a response. Do-hee asked what they would use to defeat the silver ones. Their blades are stronger. Their azure is denser. A head-on fight is a losing battle. Jihun replied that there wouldn't be a head-on fight. Oil bombs, rope traps, decoy positions, fire, smoke, panic. And when the silver one is choking on the smoke and can't see where to strike, that's when the bronze trio strikes simultaneously at a single point. 3 blades, 1 strike. The silver hide won't hold up. 5 days to prepare. On the 6th day, the Moonblade reconnaissance squad reached Beko. 12 warriors of the silver tier with spotless armor and an air of arrogance that Jihun saw on the thermal scan as heat in the forehead region. Pride, self-confidence, contempt for the bronze. A perfect blind spot. The first 6 took up their positions. Aram spotted them before they spotted Beko. She knew every stone within 1,000 steps. She saw 6 new shadows that hadn't been there yesterday. She reported. Jihun gave the order. Seryong nodded silently and vanished into the pre-dawn darkness with 8 of her best fighters. Silent. Fast. Capture pattern. The 6 silver tier scouts were bound and gagged before they could send a signal. Seryong personally took out the leader. A blow to the base of the skull. Clean. Ha-In lit a false signal fire. 3 red flashes. Moonblade protocol. Chi, go in. The strike team entered 5 minutes later, right on schedule. Straight into the narrow passage between the hills. The very same one where the boar had been burning. Oil, fire, smoke, Dohi's slingshots, and the trios. 4 trios from 3 sides. 12 blades striking simultaneously in the smoke. The silver warriors flailed about, blind and choking, and the markings on their wrists meant nothing when 3 bronze blades struck the seams of their armor simultaneously. The battle lasted 4 minutes. 12 silver warriors of the Moonblade lay on the ground, 6 bound, 6 covered in blood. Alive. All alive. Jihun had ordered them not to be killed. Seryong was surprised. She asked why. He replied that a dead enemy is just a statistic, but an enemy returning to Meyer with a tale of how 47 bronze warriors routed 12 silver ones in 4 minutes. That is fear. Fear is more useful than death. They untied all 12. They took away their weapons. They sent them back. On foot, without armor. Jihun stood by the kitchen and watched as the 12 silver warriors, clad only in their undergarments, trudged down the road away from Beko. The marks on the wrists of his 47 warriors flashed. A triple boost. The command resonance worked like clockwork. The average rank of the Vel had surpassed the 1,000 drops mark. Iron 1. Yoon Seryong had reached 2,100. Silver 1. The first silver in Beko's history. Her mark burned with white fire. Jihun felt a black pulse in his spine. His hidden counter had surpassed 1,800. Iron 3. Invisible. Non-existent. A dead zone in the chronicle. Wherever in the capital, Beko's numbers were climbing again. Somewhere on the Moonblade estate, 12 silver warriors knelt before Choi Meyer and recounted how they had been separated and sent home on foot. Meyer listened. Her expression remained unchanged, but her fingers, clenched on the armrest of her chair, dug into the wood so deeply that they left grooves. She quietly uttered a name. Song Jihun. Then she ordered that the head of the Silver Needle Guild be summoned. A clan of assassin poisoners. Professionals. The battle had ended 3 hours ago, yet the war had already escalated. Somewhere in Beko, a wagon porter was washing a pot after supper and thinking that the peach in Han Yonhua's hand had probably rotted long ago. But the memory of its taste would outlive both the peach and her. Im Ha-In, a former novice of the Moonblade, arrived at the garrison. She became an inside spy and exposed Mir's protocols. A reconnaissance squad of 12 silver warrior women from the Moonblade was wiped out in 4 minutes. The survivors were sent back to serve as a warning. Yoon Seryong reached Silver 1 with 2,100 KL. Jihun's hidden counter stood at 1,800. Cho Mir hires the Silver Needle Guild. The poison entered the water at dawn. Jihun didn't detect it with his nose or tongue. He sensed it through thermal imaging. The well in the center of the courtyard, which yesterday had been a smooth blue spot on his internal map, now glowed a murky yellow. Something had changed the water's temperature by half a degree. That was enough. He stopped Seryong by the well a second before she scooped up the water. "Don't drink it," he said. She looked at him. He told her to check it. Dohi pulled out the bucket and tossed a piece of raw meat into it. 10 minutes later, the meat had turned black and stank so badly that the 3 female warriors at the nearest barracks doubled over. The Silver Needle. The guild didn't wait. Jihun gathered his staff in a small room. Seryong, Dohi, Arim, Ha'in, Candle, Map. He said that the poison in the well meant only one thing. There was a traitor inside the garrison. Either someone had opened the gates at night, or one of their own had slipped in the poison. Hein said that the Silver Needle never acts without an inside contact. Guild protocol. First recruitment, then the strike. Always in that order. Jihong nodded. He asked Arium who was on duty at the gates last night. Arium closed her eyes. Her photographic memory flipped through the guard roster. Park Un-bi was on duty. Bronze 3. Quiet. Unobtrusive. She arrived in Baekho half a year ago from the disbanded Songwon garrison. Jihun asked Ha'in if she knew who had been supplying Baekho for the past 3 months. Ha'in replied that it was a quartermaster named Kwon Tae-ri, a civilian. He comes once every 10 days with a supply train from the county seat. Jihun remembered him. Short, fat, sweaty hands, eyes that darted about too quickly for a man with a clear conscience. He hadn't paid any attention to it at the time. A mistake. He wouldn't make that mistake again. That same day, he asked Seryong to set up a hidden guard post by the well for the night. His 2 best men. In silence. Don't tell anyone. That night, Park Un-bi slipped out of the barracks. Quietly. Barefoot. She headed for the well. A glass jar in her hand. The 2 female soldiers grabbed her by the arms before the jar could be lowered into the water. Un-bi didn't resist. She cried. She said she'd been promised a transfer to the capital's garrison. That Quartermaster Kwon had given her the glass and told her to drop a drop into the water 3 times over 3 nights. She had already completed the first night.
She hadn't had time for the second.
Jihun listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked one thing. Who had put her in touch with Kwon? Un-bi replied that a letter had arrived with the supply train. It was unsigned. But there was a seal. A crescent moon. The crest of the Moonblade clan. Meyer. Jihun nodded. He told Seryong to lock Un-bi in the storeroom. No beating. No maiming. She would be needed. He waited for the next 2 days. On the 3rd day, Kwon's wagon appeared at the gate. A cart loaded with grain and dried meat. Kwon sat on the driver's seat, smiling his sweaty smile. Jihong stood by the kitchen. 3 seconds. A cold reading. Kwon was more nervous than usual. The pulse in his neck was visible from 20 paces away. His fingers were gripping the reins too tightly. He was waiting for the result. Waiting to see the dead or the sick. Instead, he saw 47 healthy female warriors on the parade ground. His smile faltered for half a second. Jihun noticed it. Kwon unloaded the wagon. Jihun asked Dohi to check every sack. At the very bottom of the 3rd sack of grain lay another vial. A backup plan. In case the well didn't work. Poison the food. Kwon was taken away quietly. They dragged him into Un-bi's storeroom. Jihun walked in. He sat down on a sack across from Kwon. He looked at the quartermaster. Kwon started lying. He said he knew nothing. That the sacks had been packed at the warehouse. That the vial had been planted. Jihun remained silent and waited. After 20 minutes of lies, he uttered a single sentence. He named Kwon's wife and the neighborhood where she lived in the county town. Kwon turned pale. Jihun didn't threaten him. He simply showed that he knew. That was enough. Kwon began to talk. The Silver Needle Guild had approached him through an intermediary 2 months ago, even before the battle with the boar. Meyer had planned it all in advance. Kwon was paid in silver and promised a shop in the capital. He was supposed to poison the water and report on the garrison's condition, troop strength, the location of outposts, and patrol schedules. He reported every 10 days via a supply convoy. Jihun asked who exactly he was reporting to. Kwon gave a name. Ro Ji-un. Silver Needle. Operations coordinator in the border zone. Jihun made a mental note. He asked where she was based. Kwon said in an abandoned monastery 20 li south of Baekho. There were 3 of them there. Jihun, and 2 operatives. Golden tier. Each is above 6,000 drops. Jihun ran his hand over his scar. Gold ranked. Seriously. 3 gold-ranked assassin poisoners against a garrison whose average rank had only just crossed into iron. In direct combat, they didn't stand a chance. A gold warrior moves 3 times faster than an iron one. Her azure pierces standard armor right through. And these aren't just golds. This is the silver needle. Assassins. Each of them is trained to kill targets above her own rank. Jihun thought about it for a day. Then he gathered his staff and said they would head to the monastery. Seryong objected. She said it was suicide. He replied that the silver needle was waiting for results from Quan. He hadn't returned. In 3 or 4 days, they'll realize the operation has failed. They'll leave. They'll change positions. And they'll strike again. Somewhere else. At a different time. When Baek Ho isn't expecting it. Their only chance is to strike first while they're still there. While they still think Quan is just running late. Ha-in said she knows how the silver needle operates in the field. They sleep during the day. They operate at night. Their camp is minimal. Traps line the approach. Poisons coat every surface. Door handles, railings. Even the stones around the monastery could be coated with contact poison. Jihun nodded. So they can't go inside. And they can't touch anything. Do-hee raised her hand. She said she had oil. Lots of oil. And bamboo. And an idea. Jihun looked at her. She explained. He listened. Then he clarified 2 points. He added a third. Do-hee smiled. 2 days later, a squad of 20 of Baek Ho's finest female warriors set out for the abandoned monastery. Night. Moonless. Jihun walked with them. For the first time, he left his observer position and went out into the field. Not as a fighter, as eyes. Thermal imaging revealed 3 hotspots inside the monastery. Bright, dense, golden tier. 6,000 plus drops in each. They were sleeping. They worked by day and slept by night. It was daytime now. They slept during the day. Hain had been off by 12 hours. Or perhaps the silver needle had changed its protocol. It didn't matter. They were asleep, and that was for the best. Do-hee placed 12 bamboo tubes around the monastery. Each was stuffed with oil-soaked tow and wood chips. The wicks were made of charred rope. The warrior women doused the walls with oil. Quietly, slowly, without touching the stones with their bare hands. They wore ragged gloves. Jihun supervised according to the markings. The 3 figures inside didn't move. When everything was ready, he gave the signal. The fire flared up simultaneously from all sides. 12 torches. The oil on the walls burst into flames instantly. The monastery caught fire like a dry haystack. The 3 figures inside stirred. They woke up. Jihun saw one dart toward the window, the second toward the door, the third upward toward the roof. The windows were boarded up from the outside. Do-hee had taken care of that. The door was blocked with a log. The roof was the only way out. The first assassin smashed through the tiles and shot out into a cloud of smoke and fire. Golden tier. Fast as lightning. The azure on her body burned like a shield. She landed on the ground, and 6 of Baek Ho's warriors struck simultaneously. 2 sets of 3. 6 blades. The assassin parried 4. 2 pierced her side and thigh. She hissed and lunged to the side. The second set of 3 intercepted her. A blow. Strike. The golden one fell. The second assassin broke through a breach in the wall she had melted with pure azure. The monastery wall burst like an eggshell. 6,000 drops. The force of the blow was monstrous. She emerged from the fire with a face full of rage and 2 daggers in her hands. Seryong met her head-on. Silver one versus the golden archer. Madness. But Seryong wasn't moving like a silver. She was moving according to the pattern that Jihun had instilled in her. Transfer of doctrine, evasion, counterattack, closing the distance, change of angle, feint, real strike. The assassin couldn't keep up. She was used to killing those who were asleep or poisoned, not fighting a warrior who changed her style every 3 seconds. Seryong didn't defeat her alone. 3 others joined in, then 4. They overwhelmed the assassin with sheer numbers and coordination. The third one didn't make it out. The fire consumed the monastery down to its foundations. When the embers had cooled, Dohi found the melted daggers and the charred silver needle medallion in the ashes.
Jihun took the medallion.
He turned it over in his hands. He put it in his pocket. It'll come in handy. Baekho's losses: 4 wounded, 1 critically. Burns from the azure of the golden bow. But everyone is alive. Everyone. Jihun stood by the smoldering ruins and took stock. 2 golden assassins were captured alive. 1 is dead. The warriors' marks flared up again. A triple increase. Iron had grown stronger. The garrison's average rank had climbed to 1,400. Yoon Se-ryong had surpassed 2,800. Silver 2. His hidden counter had shifted to 2,400. Silver 1. A supply porter with a silver rank that doesn't exist. He looked at the 2 bound assassins. Standing nearby was Ha-in, holding a dagger, her eyes as cold as glass. He told her no. Not now. They needed them alive. The interrogation went quickly. Professional assassins aren't fanatics. When it became clear that their employer was far away and the blade was close, they started talking. They named the client, Cho Meyer. They named the sum. They named the backup plan in case the poison and the murder didn't work. Meyer was going to spread a rumor that Jihun was a demon incubus, that he steals azure from women through touch, that Baekho's abnormal growth wasn't a sign of combat prowess, but a parasitic extraction of drops from female warriors. Jihun listened. He nodded. He said it was actually clever. Rumors are more dangerous than poison. Poison kills the body. Rumors kill one's reputation. And in Hyunggran, where a man is already considered an empty vessel, an accusation of demonic parasitism is tantamount to a death sentence without trial. He wouldn't need a trial. They'd simply burn him in the town square. He turned to Se-ryong. He said they had to act faster than the rumor. They needed a victory so resounding that no whisper could drown it out. Se-ryong asked what he meant. He replied, "The 9 Moons Tournament. The annual exercises between the garrisons. In 6 months. An open field. All garrisons. All clans. The Council of 9 in the stands. If Baekho enters the tournament and wins before the eyes of all of Hyunggran, no rumor will stand." Se-ryong was silent. Then she said that the average garrison rank was 1,400. The Gold and Sapphire clans would be at the tournament. He replied that they had 6 months, and that the Battle of Canny had been won by an army half the size.
She didn't get the reference. He hadn't expected her to. He simply knew it was possible. Somewhere in the night sky above the capital, Baekho's numbers flickered on the Chronicle's graph, and High Priestess Songhwa looked at them as if they were a puzzle she couldn't solve. An anomaly, mathematically impossible. Unless there was something in the garrison that violates the dogma of the empty vessels. The rumor spread sooner than Jihun had anticipated. 10 days after the incident at the monastery, a wandering storyteller arrived in the nearest county town. An old woman with one eye and a voice that hooked the ears like a fishing hook. In the market square, she told a story about the garrison on the edge of the wasteland, where a male incubus sucks the azure from young female warriors through nocturnal touches, where poor girls lose their will and become his puppets, where the marks on their wrists glow with a false light because the drops within them were not earned, but stolen. A beautiful story. A terrifying one. Perfectly tailored to every one of Hyunggran's fears. A man stealing women's power. There is nothing more terrifying for a matriarchy in which the entire theology is built on the premise that men are empty. The rumor spread within a week. 2 weeks later, it was being repeated in 3 counties. A month later, it had reached the capital. Jihun heard about it from a merchant woman who had brought fabrics to Baekho but refused to go inside. She stood at the gate and shouted that she would not set foot on that cursed land. Se-ryong went out to meet her. The merchant spat and walked away. The fabrics were left on the road. Se-ryong picked them up and brought them to the garrison, her face as gray as the winter sky. Jihun was sitting by the kitchen, peeling carrots.
She tossed the bundle down next to him. She said they called him a demon, that they said he was stealing the azure, that the priestesses would soon come to inspect, and if they found even the slightest grounds. She didn't finish her sentence. She didn't need to. He knew. A bonfire in the square, his body, their disgrace, disbandment, brothels turned armories for the 47 warrior women, death for Serion as his accomplice. He set down the carrots, wiped the knife.
He said that a rumor is a weapon, and a weapon can be wielded.
She asked how. He replied that a rumor is powerful as long as it remains invisible, as long as it's whispered in the shadows. But if you drag it into the light and give it a specific face, the face of the person who ordered it, a rumor becomes an accusation, and an accusation can be refuted with evidence. They had evidence. 2 living silver needle assassins in the storeroom. Quartermaster Quan with a full confession. The guild medallion from the monastery's ashes. And Park Un-bi with a vial of poison and the name of the one who recruited her. But to lay all this on the table before the Council of 9 right now would mean revealing our hand too soon. Meyer Amethyst. 52,000 drops. Political clout. Connections. If he accuses her of hiring the assassins, she'll turn the accusation around. She'll say that an empty vessel is slandering the commander, that the evidence is fabricated, that the assassins have been bribed. And they'll believe her because Hyungran trusts the amethysts, not men. Jihun thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, he called Hyun.
He said one word to her: counterintelligence. Hyun understood instantly. She knew how information flowed within the clans. 15 years in the Moonblade had taught her that. A week later, 3 female warriors left Beko. Not the best fighters, just ordinary ones, unremarkable. They went to 3 different county towns with 3 different stories that all led to the same conclusion. The first was about the commander who had hired assassins to destroy the border garrison defending people from demons. The second was about how the Moonblade clan was poisoning the wells of its own female warriors. The third was about how Chol Meyer was so afraid of a small garrison of 47 bronze warriors that she sent golden assassins against them. And she lost. The last story was the most devastating, not because it made accusations, but because it laughed. The Amethyst commander had lost to the Bronzes. Laughter stings more than accusations. A month or 2 later, the rumors collided in the capital like 2 currents in a river. People discussed both the incubus demon and the cowardly commander. Neither prevailed. They neutralized each other. Jihun bought time, not the war. Time.
While the rumors gnawed at each other, he trained the garrison. The 4th month, the 5th. The regimen was brutal. Up before dawn. Training in 3s. Tactical drills. Drilling doctrine every day. Juhong stood by the kitchen or the storeroom or the well and spoke softly, while Serion repeated his words, and the 47 female warriors pushed themselves to the limit and rebuilt themselves. Ambush pattern. Wedge pattern. False retreat with a turn pattern. Dohi sling crossfire pattern. Night combat pattern. Urban combat pattern. Each pattern was recorded in the warrior's azure through command resonance. Every executed order yielded a gain. Not combat-related. Leveling. Less than an actual combat. But constant. Drop by drop. Day by day. By the 5th month, the garrison's average rank had surpassed 2,200. Silver 1. Yun Seryong reached 3,800. Silver 2. Closer to the upper limit. Dohi created a new weapon. Reinforced crossbows mounted on a frame with a triple tension mechanism. The bolt pierced silver-grade armor from 100 paces away. Jihun shared the principle of the block bow with her. Dohi adapted it to local materials in 3 weeks. Kim Aram drew a complete map of all the border territories from memory. Every rock, every trail, every water source. Juhong overlaid his thermal markings onto her data and produced a map that no Hyungran clan possessed. A map on which everything is visible. Heiyin trained with fierce determination. Her mark burned brighter with each passing week. 430 became 800. 800 became 1,500. 1,500 became 2,000. Iron 3. Almost silver. Meyer had kept her at 430 for 15 years. In the 5 months she spent in Beiko, she had grown fivefold. One evening she approached Jihun. She stood there in silence. Then she said she hated Meyer. But now something else had been added to that hatred. She said that for the first time in her life, she felt like she was growing, that she was getting stronger, that the mark on her wrist was glowing not because someone had given her permission, but because she had earned it. Jihun looked at her. He said that every drop on her counter was her own, earned in battle, in sweat, in blood. He had only shown her the way. She had walked it herself. Ha-In nodded. Her eyes were dry, no longer glassy with rage. The rage hadn't gone anywhere, but now it had a channel. In the 6th month, Commander Beck Sola sent a letter, an official one, on letterhead bearing the seal of the Border Garrison Inspectorate. Beko was invited to the Tournament of the 9 Moons. Participation was mandatory. The format. Each garrison fields a full team. Opponents are assigned by lottery. 1 fight. The loser is eliminated. The winner advances. 8 garrisons. 3 rounds. The final. Sarion brought the letter to Jihun. Her hands weren't shaking, but her voice was quieter than usual. She said the draw could pit them against anyone, against the golds, against the sapphires. He replied that the draw wasn't random. It's never random. Mir will make sure Beko ends up in her strike force in the 1st round. She wants public humiliation. She wants to crush the anomaly in front of all of Hyongran. To prove that the numbers in the chronicle are a mistake, a forgery, demonic interference. And to bury Beko once and for all. Sarion asked what to do. He replied, exactly what she wants. To face her, and to win. 47 against 100. Silver against gold. In front of all of Hyongran. In front of the Council of 9. In front of the High Priestess. In front of Han Yonhua, who would be sitting in the front row, smiling until she couldn't anymore. He ran his hand over the scar on his chest and added that peach season was coming to an end. It was time to harvest. The capital, Chongryon, was a sight to behold. White walls, blue-tiled roofs. The spires of the Hall of Chronicles above the central square glowed with azure so brightly that the sky above the city seemed eternally blue, even on a cloudy day. The Beko garrison entered the capital in a column of 2. 47 female warriors in polished armor. The night before their departure, Dohee had patched every crack. Chuhong walked at the rear of the column. A supply porter's cloak. A hood. A bag of kitchen utensils slung over his shoulder. No one looked at him. They looked at the female warriors. They looked at them in amazement. The markings on their wrists glowed silver. 47 silver ones from the garrison that, just a year ago, had been the bronze dump. Someone on the street whistled. Someone laughed. A small garrison with big ambitions. The 9 Moons tournament arena occupied the central square. An oval of white stone withstands for 5,000 spectators, a sandy field the size of 3 training grounds, passages, narrow corridors, columns. The arena wasn't just a battlefield, it was a labyrinth. For every tournament, the organizers changed the configuration of the walls and passages. Zhu Hong looked at the arena and, in 3 seconds, read it like a book. 2 narrow passages on the flanks, a wide central corridor, 4 columns creating blind spots. The sand was soft. That meant quick maneuvers would be more difficult. The stone walls were smooth. Nothing to grab onto. The central corridor was a trap. Whoever takes it will find themselves under crossfire from the flanks. Meyer loves a head-on assault. She'll send her 100 down the center. He smiled beneath his hood. The draw took place that evening, in a tent next to the arena. The garrison commanders drew tokens from a bag. Sarion drew for Beko. She reached into the bag and pulled out token number 3. She looked at the board. The 3rd pair. Beko against the Volson garrison's Assault 100. The Volson garrison. Subordinate to the Moonblade clan. Commanded by an officer appointed by Meyer. Composition, 100 female warriors. Average rank, Gold 2. 7,500 drops.
Jihun stood in the corner of the tent with a ladle and a jug of water.
A supply soldier. He was serving drinks. He saw Mir, at the other end of the tent, nod almost imperceptibly when she saw the result of the draw. Rigged. Just as he'd predicted. Se-ryong returned to him with a token. Her face was stony. She said quietly that the Walson 100 were Mir's best fighters. Gold. He nodded. Replied that he knew. Told her she needed to get a good night's sleep. She left. He stayed. Waited until the tent emptied. When the last servant left, he approached the arena model on the table. Wooden walls, a sandy field, passages, columns. He looked at the model, and the thermal markings superimposed themselves on it. Blind spots, lines of fire, dead zones where even a golden wouldn't see an attack until the very last second. He stood there for an hour. Then he went out. That night, he gathered his staff in a cramped little room in the barracks for visiting garrisons. Se-ryong, Do-hee, Arim, Hain. A candle on the floor, shadows on the walls. He began to speak and didn't stop for 40 minutes. The plan was more complex than anything they'd done before. 3 phases. Phase 1. A feigned retreat. 47 female warriors enter the arena and take up positions in the central corridor. The Volson 100 sees this and attacks down the center. A frontal assault. Meyer's favorite tactic. Her officer has been trained the same way. When the 100 enters the corridor, Baeko retreats. Quickly, in an orderly fashion, as if they're running. The 100 give chase. Phase 2. The trap. The retreating female warriors split into 2 flanking passages. 10 to the left, 10 to the right. 27 remain at the end of the corridor. The 100 are drawn completely into the corridor. A long column in a narrow space. 100 people cannot attack at the same time. The front 15 are fighting. The remaining 85 stand and wait. Useless. At that moment, the flanking groups strike from the sides through the passages. Simultaneously. 20 blades into the side of the column. Phase 3. The wedge. Yoon Se-ryong, along with her top 5, strikes through the flanking group straight into the center of the column, where Commander Wolson stands. Cut off the head, and the body falls. Do-hee raised her hand. She asked about the nets. Jihun nodded. He said that Do-hee would enter the arena at night disguised as a cleaning lady. She would plant trapping nets in the sand of the central corridor, not too deep, just under a thin layer. When the 100-man unit runs down the corridor in pursuit of the retreating enemy, their feet will get tangled. They won't stop, but they'll slow down for 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds would be enough for the flanking groups to take up their positions. Aram pulled a piece of paper from her bosom. On it was a diagram of the arena, drawn from memory after a single glance. Every column, every passageway, every crack in the stone. Jihun looked at the diagram and corrected 2 details. Aram memorized the corrections instantly. Ha-in said she knew Commander Wolson, So Jin-hae, a former classmate from their clan. Strong, fast, gold 3, 8,200 drops. But impulsive. If she sees a retreat, she'll rush in to pursue without thinking. She won't check the flanks. She won't reserve. A predator's instinct. Jihun nodded. He said that was exactly what he was counting on. The day before the tournament, Do-hee entered the arena with brooms and buckets. A cleaning lady. No one paid her any attention. In 2 hours, she set 14 rope nets in the sand of the central corridor. Delicate work. Invisible. Jihong watched from the stands. Merchants and onlookers sat beside him. He was one of them. A wagon driver in a cloak. A jug of water on his lap. Tournament day. Morning. The first 2 matches went without surprises. The large garrisons crushed the small ones. Gold versus silver. The usual order. The stands buzzed. 5,000 spectators. In the first row was the Council of Nine's box. 9 seats, 7 were occupied. 2 commanders were absent. Next to the box, a separate chair. High Priestess Songhua. Scarlet Tear. 140,000 drops of azure. The mark on her wrist burned so brightly it seemed like living fire. She sat motionless, gazing at the arena with the face of a stone idol. 2 seats from her sat Han Yonhua, amethyst tear. 47,000 drops. She was drinking wine from a crystal goblet and smiling. On the other side of the box sat Cho Meyer. 52,000 drops. She wasn't smiling. She was watching the entrance from which Beko was supposed to appear. She waited. The third match. The announcement was made. The Wolson garrison versus the Beko garrison. The gates opened. The Wolson 100 marched into the arena in formation. 100 female warriors of the golden tier. Their armor gleamed. Their blades were drawn. Their marks burned with yellow fire. So Jinhei led the way, tall, broad-shouldered, 8,200 drops. Confidence in every step. The crowd roared with approval. 47 emerged from the opposite gate. Silver marks, worn armor. Yoon Seryong led the way. A mark of 4,600, silver too, higher than a month ago. Training had given her that final push. Someone in the stands laughed. 47 versus 100, silver versus gold. A farce. Mir leaned back in her chair. Yonhua took a sip of wine. The high priestess didn't move a muscle. Jihun sat at the far end of the stands, a cloak, a hood, a bag of kitchen utensils under. He closed his eyes. The thermal markings flashed. 47 points on one side of the arena, 100 on the other. Horn. Beko had arrived in the capital for the tournament of the 9 dragons. The draw had been rigged, and the garrison was pitted against Mir's 100-strong Wolson unit. Gold versus silver. 100 against 47. Jihun had devised a 3-phase plan involving a feigned retreat and flanking ambushes.
Dohee had laid nets in the arena's sand. In the stands sat the Council of 9 and High Priestess Songhua. The horn sounded. And Seryong led the 47 into the central corridor. In even formation, without haste. Shields forward, blades at their hips. From the outside it looked like desperation. A small garrison trying to seize the center before being crushed. So Jinhei saw this and didn't wait. Ha-In was right, a predator's instinct. She raised her sword, and 100 warriors surged down the central corridor to intercept them. 100 golden warriors racing down the wide passageway. The clang of armor, the clang of blades. Sand flew from beneath their feet. Beautiful, powerful, foolish. Jihun opened his eyes in the stands. The thermal display showed 100 hotspots being drawn into the corridor. A long column, stretched out. The front 15 had broken away from the rear. A gap. Phase 1. Seryong gave the command. The 47 turned and ran. A retreat, swift, noisy. Someone dropped a shield, someone stumbled. It looked like panic. It looked like a rout. The spectators booed. Cowards! Beko is running! Meyer leaned forward in her chair. Yonhua laughed.
Even the high priestess turned her head. So Jinha bellowed a command, and the 100 picked up speed. Pursuit. Drive them in. Finish them off. The front ranks of the 100 charged into the zone where Dohee had set up the nets. The sand gave way beneath their feet. The ropes tightened. Not a wall, not a barricade, just a tangle beneath their feet. The first row stumbled. They didn't fall. They slowed down. For 3 seconds. The second row crashed into the first, the third into the second. The column compressed like a spring. 100 warriors in a narrow corridor were crushing each other. 3 seconds of chaos. Jihun counted. 1, 2, 3. Phase 2. The flanks. 10 warriors on the left, 10 on the right. They hadn't run. They'd been waiting in the side passages from the very first second of the retreat. While the center ran and lured the enemy in, the flanks stood their ground. Now they struck. Simultaneously. 20 blades into the side of the compressed column. Silver against gold. A losing battle head-on. But from the side. From the side of a column that's crushing itself and can't turn around. From the side when arms are pressed against the body and a blade can't be raised. From the side when the shield is turned forward and the blow comes from the side. The silver blade cut through like butter, screams, clanging. The first wounded Volsons fell onto the sand. The gold marks flickered out one by one. not death. The tournament continued until the mark was reached. When a warrior's azure dropped below the critical threshold due to a wound, her mark would fade, and the battle would end for her. 15 marks faded during the first 30 seconds of the flanking attack. So Jihun screamed from the center of the column. She tried to reorganize the formation, but there was no formation. There was a stampede in the corridor. She cut her way through her own ranks to the right flank and encountered Baekho's trio. 3 silvers. She struck, and the first one was sent flying into the wall. 8,200 drops, golden shot. The force of the blow was such that it sent the silver one flying 5 steps back. The second of the trio struck from the other side. Jihun parried without looking. The third came up from behind. Jihun spun around and kicked her away. She was stronger than each of them, much stronger. But while she was fighting the trio, while she was wasting seconds on the 3 silver-ranked fighters who were circling around her and preventing her from concentrating, the third phase began, the wedge. Yoon Se-ryong led the 5 through the left flank passage. They flanked the column. They emerged from behind. There, where the rear ranks of the 100 stood in confusion. The rear guard couldn't see what was happening up front. They only heard the screams. They only felt the column closing in. Se-ryong's 5-man unit struck the rear ranks like a knife in the back. 5 blades at once. The wedge pattern woven into their azure doctrinal transfer. They moved as a single entity. 10 markers went out in 10 seconds. Se-ryong cut through the rear ranks and emerged in the center of the column, straight towards Jin-hae. Commander Wolson stood with 2 blades and blood on her face, not her own. She saw Se-ryong and understood. The head. Cut off the head. Meyer had taught her the same thing. But Meyer had taught her to attack, not to defend. Se-ryong struck. 4,600 against 8,200. Jin-hae's drops held nearly double the numerical superiority, but Se-ryong wasn't fighting as if she were up against 4,600. The application of her doctrine elevated her to a level above her rank. She moved like a golden. Strike, retreat, counterattack, feint, change of rhythm. Jihun parried. She was more powerful. Each of her blocks sent Se-ryong back a step. But Se-ryong came back, and each time from a different angle. Jihun in the stands counted the seconds, 7, 8, 9. On the 10th second, the 5 struck. Se-ryong distracted her. The 5 struck. 3 blades at the seam of the armor from behind. 1 to the back of the knee, 1 to the elbow. So Jin-hae collapsed to 1 knee. The mark on her wrist flashed. Azure fluid flowed from the 5 wounds. She raised her head and looked at Se-ryong. Her eyes were full of rage and confusion. She didn't understand how this had happened. Se-ryong didn't wait. A blade was at her throat. Jin-hae froze. The mark flashed one last time and went dark. The critical threshold. The battle was over. Silence. 5,000 spectators were silent. Wounded Volson warriors lay and sat in the arena. 53 out of 100 marks had gone dark. The remaining 47 stood in the center of the corridor, surrounded on all sides by Baekho warriors, and were slowly lowering their blades. The battle had lasted 11 minutes. 47 against 100. Baekho's casualties, 2 wounded, seriously, but alive. In the Council of Nine's stands, something happened that hadn't been seen since the tournament's inception. Cho Meyer stood up, white, like the marble of the arena, her hands clenched into fists. She stared at the field without blinking. Han Yonhua slowly set down her glass of wine. Unfinished. For the first time that evening, she wasn't smiling. Commander Baek Sol-ah, in the 3rd row of the stands, tilted her head ever so slightly. Confirmation. She knew. She'd seen this before in Baekho, but it was one thing to see the numbers. It was quite another to witness the battle. And in a separate seat, High Priestess Songhua, 140,000 drops, the Scarlet Archer. She sat motionless, but her eyes were moving. Not across the field, across the stands. She was searching. Jihun felt her gaze like a burn on the back of his neck. The thermal marker flashed a warning. A scorching point in the council box. 140,000 drops concentrated in a single gaze. She was scanning the stands, looking for an anomaly, looking for the one who didn't fit in. He lowered his head, pulled his hood down further, held his breath. 10 seconds. 20. Her gaze passed him by. It settled on someone at the other end of the stands, a false target. Jihun exhaled, but he knew it was only temporary. She'll find him. She's the Scarlet One. 140,000 drops. She has her own cold reading, and it's 10 times stronger than his. The battle at the Nine Dragons tournament, 47 against 100. Dohee's network's feigned retreat and a flanking attack tore through the Wolson column. Yoon Saryong led the wedge and personally took Commander So Jin-hae out of the fight. Victory in 11 minutes with 2 wounded. Meyer was in shock. Yeonhwa stopped smiling. The High Priestess began scanning the stands in search of an anomaly. After the battle, such a silence hung over the arena that you could hear the sand trickling from the wounded fighter's armor. Then the stands erupted, not in applause, but in a roar. 5,000 voices at once. Some shouted that it was a cheat. Others called it a miracle. Some demanded a review. Others simply screamed because they couldn't believe it. The 47 silver had crushed the 100 gold, and that was impossible. It doesn't happen that way. It shouldn't happen that way. Yoon Saryong stood over the defeated So Jin-hae, and the mark on her wrist was glowing. Brighter than before. Much brighter. The triple boost from the battle, following Jihun's tactical plan, took effect instantly. The Hall of Chronicles in the spire above the square flared up. Yoon Saryong's stats shot up. 4,600 became 5,100. 5,100 became 5,800. 5,800 became 6,200. 6,200 became 6,800. Gold tier. The mark changed color from white-silver to a fiery yellow. Yoon Saryong. Gold -1. 6,800 drops of azure. A year ago, she was bronze 2 with 230 drops. The numbers raced across the sky above the Hall of Chronicles, and 5,000 spectators looked up. But it wasn't just her. 47 markers flashed simultaneously. Every female warrior of Baekho received a boost. The average rank had surpassed 3,400. Silver 2. Someone in the stands shouted Serion's name, then someone else. A minute later, 5,000 people were chanting, Yoon Serion, Yoon Serion, Yoon Serion. She stood in the arena, sword in hand. Blood on her armor. Not hers. The mark glowed gold. And she wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at the far end of the stands, at the figure in the cart driver's cloak. She found him with her eyes. She waited. Jihun sat motionless, hands on his knees, hood pulled low. He didn't nod, he didn't smile. He simply looked at her, and she could see his eyes beneath the shadow of his hood. That was enough. She turned away toward the crowd and raised her sword. The roar from the stands doubled. Jihun stood up and quietly made his way toward the exit. The job was done. But the war was only just beginning. Meyer didn't wait. She left the council box and headed for the corridor beneath the stands. Jihun saw it on the thermal scan. The Amethyst Tyrant's heat signature was moving quickly. 52,000 drops. Direction? Toward the arena. Toward the gates through which Serion had exited. Meyer wanted to intercept her. She wanted to say something or do something. Jihun quickened his pace. He couldn't be nearby. He couldn't. If Meyer saw him next to Serion right after the fight, if she realized that the supply porter and the commander were one and the same, everything would come crashing down. He turned into a side passage and disappeared into the crowd. A minute later, Meyer caught up with Serion at the arena gates. 47 Baekho warriors stood in formation. Meyer approached Serion. She stood right next to her. Amethyst versus gold. 52,000 versus 6,800. A 7-to-1 difference. The air around Meyer thickened under the pressure of Lazuri. The Baekho warriors in the front row took a step back. Instinctively. Meyer told Serion that she knew. She said this wasn't her victory, that someone was standing behind her. She said she would find out. And when she did, Sereon didn't back down. The mark on her wrist glowed gold. 6,800 drops. 7 times less than Meyer's. But she didn't back down. She looked Meyer in the eyes and replied that Beko had won according to the tournament rules. In the arena. Before the council. In front of the priestess. If Commander Che wants to contest it, let her contest it. Officially. In front of everyone. Meyer clenched her jaw. She turned around. She left. 52,000 drops of pressure vanished along with her, and Beko's warriors exhaled. Sereon didn't exhale. She stood rigid until Meyer disappeared around the corner. Then she allowed herself to blink. Once. In the barracks for visiting garrisons, Jihun was waiting. Sereon entered. She closed the door. She leaned her back against the wall. She said that Meyer knew. He nodded. He said that of course he knew. After today's battle, all of Hyungran knew that Beko was no ordinary garrison. But knowing and proving it were two different things. As long as Sereon had a public victory to her name. As long as the figures in the chronicle confirmed their growth. Meyer couldn't touch them, not officially. But Meyer doesn't play by the rules. He looked at Sereon. He said the next blow wouldn't be in the arena. It would be quiet, political. Meyer would go to the council. He would demand an audit of the Beko garrison. He would demand an investigation into the anomalous growth. He'll demand that the high priestess personally inspect every female warrior. And if the priestess inspects them, if she looks deep enough, she'll see the command resonance. She'll see that the growth rate of the drops is 3 times higher than normal. She'll see patterns of combat doctrine that aren't in any textbook. And she'll ask where they came from. Sereon asked what to do. He replied that they needed to act before the audit began. Meyer submitted a request. The council will review it. Bureaucracy. A week. Maybe 2. During those 2 weeks, they need to strike so hard that Meyer won't have time to worry about the audit. She asked how. He said he had 2 living Silver Needle assassins, the quartermaster's confession, the guild medallion. And now, after the tournament, Beko has a public name, a reputation, a voice. If Sereon steps before the council and accuses Choi Meyer of hiring assassins to destroy the border garrison, if she presents evidence, assassins, poison, the medallion, if she does this publicly in 9 Moon Square while all of Hyungran still remembers today's battle, Meyer will be forced to defend herself. Not to attack, to defend herself. And someone on the defensive doesn't file requests for an audit. Sereon was silent for a minute. Then she said it was dangerous. To accuse the Amethyst commander publicly. If there wasn't enough evidence. If the council sided with Meyer. Execution. For her. For the entire garrison. For Jihun. He replied that there would be enough evidence. He'd been working on this for 5 months. Every detail, every piece of testimony, every thread leads to Meyer. And he added that execution awaited them either way. If Meyer secures an audit and the priestess finds him, an empty vessel at the center of the military machine, the pyre will be the only outcome. The only difference is whether they go to the pyre in silence or put up a fight. Sereon looked at him for a long time. Then she straightened up, stepped away from the wall, fist pressed to her chest, back straight. Just like on the first day. Just like when she met him at the Beko gates, covered in mud and blood. She said she would fight. He nodded. He ran his palm over the scar. Peach. The taste of a peach. Yonhua. But first, Meyer. A step. One of many. The closest one. He stepped out of the barracks and looked up at the sky above the capital. The spire of the Hall of Chronicles glowed blue. The numbers raced by. Yoon Sereon, 6,800. Golden tier, Beko, average 3,400. And somewhere behind these numbers, in this stream of light and data, was an invisible line that didn't exist. Sun Jihun, 24,000 drops of azure, equivalent to a sapphire tier. The storage unit in his spine worked quietly and ceaselessly. Every enemy killed by his squad earned him a percentage. Thousands of tiny drops had come together to form a stream. The stream into the river into the lake. 24,000. If his counter were visible, the mark on his wrist would glow blue, brighter than Bec Sola's. But there was no mark. There was only the brand of an empty vessel, black, dead. He looked at it. Then he looked up at the sky. Then he went to make dinner. 47 female warriors deserved some hot rice. Tomorrow, they would change history. After her victory, Yoon Se-ryong had reached the golden tier with 6,800 KL, while Baekho's average rank had surpassed 3,400. Mireille had personally threatened Se-ryong and was preparing a request for an audit of the garrison. Jihun decided to launch a preemptive strike and publicly accuse Mireille of hiring assassins by presenting evidence before the council. Jihun's hidden counter reached 24,000 KL, equivalent to the Sapphire tier. Yoon Se-ryong stepped out onto Nine Dragon Square at dawn, alone, without armor, wearing a simple military uniform from the Baekho garrison. The mark on her wrist glowed gold. 6,800 drops. She stood at the foot of the Hall of Chronicles and struck the stone slab with her sword 3 times. A hollow ring echoed across the square, an ancient ritual of accusation. No one had used it in 300 years. 3 strikes meant that the warrior was demanding a trial of honor against a superior. A public one. An irreversible one. The guards at the Hall of Chronicles exchanged glances. One ran inside. 10 minutes later, the square began to fill up. First the guards, then the townspeople, then the warrior women from the barracks of the capital's garrison. The rumor spread faster than the wind. Someone from Baekho had called for a trial of honor. That very one. The golden one. The one who had routed 100 Volsun warriors yesterday. Half an hour later, there were more than 1,000 people in the square. An hour later, 3,000. The Council of 9 had been officially notified. By law, they were required to be present. All 9 of them. Refusal was tantamount to an admission of guilt by the accused party. Jihun stood in the crowd. A cloak, a hood, a jug of water. The wagoner was waiting for his mistress in the square. Nothing out of the ordinary. He'd seen on the thermal scan how 9 hotspots were converging on the square from different parts of the capital. Amethyst and scarlet. 30,000 plus drops in each. Heavy, dense, dangerous. And one point shines brighter than the rest. 140,000. High Priestess Songfa. She was the last to arrive. She stepped out of the Hall of Chronicles onto the upper terrace. She stood at the railing and looked down at the square. At Se-ryong at the foot of the terrace. At the crowd. At the council's box, which was filling up one by one. Meyer appeared 20 minutes after the strike. She walked across the square in full battle armor of the Moonblade clan. 52,000 drops. The mark on her wrist glowed violet. The air around her trembled under the pressure of the azure. The crowd parted. She stopped 10 paces from Se-ryong. She looked down on her. Amethyst versus gold, a 7-fold difference. Se-ryong raised her head. She recited the ritual formula. She stated her name, her rank, her garrison, the name of the accused, her rank, her clan. Then she began to speak. Jihun had instilled every word in her during 3 nights of preparation. Not a speech, not a shout. Facts, one after another. First fact. Quartermaster Quan Tae-ri was recruited by an agent of the Moonblade clan to poison the water supply of the Baekho garrison. Quan was brought out into the square, bound. He repeated his confession. In a trembling voice, he named the middleman, he named the sum. She named the crest on the letter's seal, a crescent moon. Second fact. Novice Park Eun-bi was recruited through Quan to poison the well a second time. Eun-bi came out on her own, unbound, voluntarily. She was trembling but spoke clearly. A vial, 3 nights, a promise of a transfer. Third fact. The Silver Needle Guild sent 3 assassins from the Golden Tier to eliminate the personnel of the Baekho garrison. 2 assassins were brought out, bound, in shackles of hardened steel. They remained silent. But Se-ryong showed the guild's medallion, melted, with the contract number engraved on the back. The contract number could be verified in the guild's registry. The guild operated legally, licensed assassinations. The client was always on record. Fourth fact. Sarion named the contract amount, source of funds, the treasury of the Moonblade clan, an expense disguised as a purchase of horse fodder. This information came from Hain.
She knew the clan's accounting like the back of her hand. The crowd in the square was silent. 3,000 people, and the silence was so thick you could hear the pigeons flapping their wings on the rooftops. Mide stood 10 paces away from Sarion, her expression unchanging, not a trace of emotion. But Jihun could see it on the thermal scan. Pulse, 130. Her body temperature had risen by 1 degree. The azure within her was tightening around her heart. A combat reflex. She was preparing to strike. Not with words, with force. 52,000 drops. One blow, and Sarion would be dead. One strike, and the evidence would be meaningless, because the dead don't make accusations. Jihun clenched his fists beneath his cloak. If Mide struck, there was nothing he could do. 24,000 hidden drops were useless if he couldn't step out of the shadows. If he did step out, an empty vessel with a sapphire-level azure. The end. For everyone. Mide took a step forward. The pressure of lazuri in the square surged. The female warriors in the crowd recoiled. The townspeople ran. Sarion didn't move. She stood with her broom ablaze with gold. 6,800 against 52,000. Mide took a second step. A third.
A voice from the upper terrace. Quiet, steady, but one that stopped everything. People, the wind, the doves, the hearts. High Priestess Sanhua uttered a single word. Stop. 140,000 drops in a single word. Meyer's pressure shattered like glass against stone. Amethyst against scarlet. A threefold difference. Meyer froze. Literally. Not of her own volition. The priestess's azure gaze paralyzed her on the spot. Sanhua said that the charges had been brought in accordance with ritual. The trial would take place. The evidence would be examined. The council would render its verdict in 3 days. Until then, both sides were protected by the law. Any act of violence would constitute an admission of guilt. Meyer stood frozen by the pressure of the scarlet tea. Then Sanhua released her. Meyer staggered forward. She straightened up. She looked at Sarion, then at the terrace. Then she turned and walked away. Every step echoed against the stone of the plaza. The crowd parted before her like water. Jihun exhaled. For the first time in 5 minutes. 3 days. The council. Review of the evidence. He knew the evidence was ironclad. Ha-In had been working on it for 5 months. Every thread was tied off. Every knot was tightened. But he also knew that in 3 days, Meyer would try to eliminate the witnesses. Quan, Unbi, the assassins, maybe even Ha-In. He sent Do-Hee with 3 teams of guards to protect the witnesses. Around the clock. Non-stop. Do-Hee had booby-trapped the approaches to the barracks with oil traps and tripwires laced with bamboo spikes. Let them try. 3 nights. The first passed quietly. The second too. On the third night, just before dawn, Jihung's thermal marker flared up. 4 hot spots were moving toward Beko's barracks. Fast. Silent. Golden. Mercenaries. Not the Silver Needle. Others. The cleaners. Do-Hee heard the first tripwire snap. A bamboo spike struck into the darkness, and someone hissed in pain. The trio at the door lined up. 4 shadows darted backward. One was limping. They were gone. They'd failed. Jihung stood on the barracks roof and watched as the 4 dots receded into the night. Meyer tried, and failed. The trial was in the morning. 9 Dragons Square. The sun was out. 5,000 spectators. The full council was present. A priestess stood on the terrace. The evidence was presented. It was verified. The Silver Needle contract number was confirmed by the guild registry. The financial trail led through the Moonblade treasury. Quan confirmed his testimony. Bi confirmed hers. The assassins remained silent, but the medallion and the contract spoke for them. The council deliberated for an hour. Meyer stood in the square, her face a mask, a beautiful, cold, dead mask. The verdict. The Moonblade clan is found guilty of organizing an assassination attempt against the active Hyungran garrison. Commander Cho Meyer is stripped of her rank. The clan is disbanded. Its property is confiscated. The lands and mines of Lazuri are transferred to the victimized garrison. Beko. Meyer listened to the verdict. She didn't blink. The guards approached her. She allowed them to remove her shoulder guards. She allowed them to break the clan seal. Then she looked across the square, across the crowd, across thousands of heads, straight at the supply porter in the cloak. Their eyes met. She knew. She had always known. But she couldn't prove it. Jihun didn't look away. 3 seconds. Then Meyer turned away and walked off, escorted by the guards. Her back was straight. Her head held high. Even in defeat, she carried herself like a commander. Cha Jihun had given her that, but nothing more. The scar on his chest didn't hurt. It simply was there. The lands of the Moonblade clan were placed under Beko's seal the day after the trial. 3 villages, 2 azure mines, barracks for 300 female warriors, an arsenal, stables, a library of tactical scrolls that Jihun dismissed as rubbish after 5 minutes of reading. The 14th century. Line formations, head-on assaults. Not a single mention of flanking maneuvers. Not one. In 800 years of Hyungran's military history, no one had ever thought of the simplest ambush. He closed the scroll and put it back. The world fought head-on, and lost to those who knew how to think. Formally, the lands were ruled by Yoon Se-ryung, the Golden Bow. 6,800 drops. The youngest female commander of her own clan in the history of Hyungran. Under the laws of the matriarchy, a man could not own land, a seal, or a title. Se-ryung became the face of the clan. Jihun remained in the shadows. That's how it should be, for now. The first week was spent getting settled. Through Se-ryung, Jihun organized the garrison. 47 female warriors became the core. A new unit began to form around this core. Former novices from the disbanded Moonblade clan, those whom Meyer had cast out onto the streets when the clan collapsed. 83 female warriors, ranging from bronze to silver, hungry, angry, homeless. Se-ryung opened the gates. Jihun conducted a cold reading of each one, 3 seconds per fighter. He selected 60. The rest were sent to rear services. 107 female warriors. The new Beko garrison. Average rank, 2,800 drops. Silver -2. With a core of 47 veterans, the average combat effectiveness ceiling was significantly higher. He began drilling the new recruits with tactical patterns, transferring doctrine, trios, formations, ambushes, wedges, feint retreats. The new recruits learned 3 times faster than the first 47, because the first 47 already carried his doctrine. They trained the new recruits, and the doctrine was passed on. Like a virus, like fire. The command's resonance worked through intermediaries, not just through his direct orders, through his female students. This was new. He hadn't expected it. A black chill pulsed down his spine every time another recruit was integrated into the system. His secret counter crept upward. 24,000 became 25,000. 26,000. 27,000. Quietly. Invisibly. Hain was given a separate assignment. Reconnaissance. She knew every dirty secret of the border zone, every secret smuggler's route, every spot where the clans hid unaccounted for azure. In a month, she had built a network of 12 informants, former novices of the Moonblade who had scattered across the counties and were happy to sell their grievances for a handful of silver. Dohi, a workshop, a real one, with a forge, with an anvil, with a supply of metal from the former clan's arsenal. She locked herself in there for 3 days and emerged with the blueprints Jihun had given her a week earlier. A reinforced crossbow with a pulley mechanism, a siege catapult on a wheeled frame, shields with a double frame made of bamboo and steel, and something new: smoke bombs, oil, tow, saltpeter that Dohe found in the Moonblade's old cellar. Jihun explained the principle to her. Not gunpowder. Gunpowder was still a long way off, but a smokescreen on the battlefield gave an advantage that no Hyungran clan possessed. Kim A-Rim expanded the map. Now it covered not only the borderlands, but also 3 counties deeper into the territory. Every road, every bridge, every ford. Ariam walked the land and memorized it. She returned and dictated her findings. Jihun overlaid thermal markings and produced a map that showed not only the terrain, but also the flow of people, caravans, patrols, and demon migrations. A living map. 2 months. The 10th, the 11th. The garrison grew. The average rank surpassed 3,800. Yongse-ryong reached 9,400, the upper limit of the golden tier. Almost sapphire. The growth didn't stop. The command resonance and the triple bonus from combat operations in the wasteland worked non-stop. Chuhong dispatched out teams of 3 and 5 to clear out demons every week. Regularly, methodically, like an assembly line. Every sweep yielded a boost. Every boost strengthened the garrison. Every strengthening expanded the zone of control. By the 11th month, Baeko controlled a territory 3 times larger than the original. The wasteland of the Grey Crows was retreating. The demons were moving further north. And in the capital, Cheongryeon, something was happening that Jihun had both expected and feared. High Priestess Songhua had launched an investigation, not against Baeko, not against Soryeon. It was against the anomaly. She retrieved the data from the Hall of Chronicles for the past year. She plotted growth charts for all the garrisons. Baeko stood out from the curve like a nail sticking out of a board. Vertical growth. Impossible without an external factor. She went through all known factors: rare resources, secret training techniques, azure artifacts. Nothing matched. There was one possibility left that she refused to consider, because it violated the dogma of the empty vessels. 800 years of theology, the foundation of the 9 Scarlet Clans' power. Sonva sat in the Hall of Chronicles and stared at the graphs, and the graph stared back at her. A steady growth curve that began exactly on the day the exiled man from the Red Chrysanthemum clan arrived in Baeko. A coincidence? Probably. She pulled up the file. Sun Jihun, empty vessel, formerly owned by Han Yunhua, sold to Che Mi-rae, exiled to Baeko. Status: cart porter. Combat rank: none. Mark: none. Azure: 0. She reread the file 3 times. Then she closed it. Then she opened it again. And she sent an order to Bek Sola to bring the wagon porter from Baeko to the capital for an interview. Commander Bek Sola received the order and, for the first time in 20 years of service, did not carry it out immediately. She sat at her desk and stared at the High Priestess's seal. Then she stood up. She got dressed. And she didn't go to Baeko. She went to Cheongryeon, to Sonwei herself. She had to first understand what the priestess intended to do with whoever she found. Jihun didn't know about this. He stood on the wall of Baeko and watched the sunset over the wasteland. A black chill pulsed steadily and calmly down his spine. 27,000 drops. Invisible. A hidden sapphire within the body of an empty vessel. He ran his hand over the scar and thought of Han Yunhui. She was still sitting in the Scarlet Chrysanthemum Manor. Still amethyst. Still 47,000 drops. But she was no longer laughing. Her spies were reporting to her about Baeko, about Seryong, about the garrison that had risen from the ashes and devoured the Moonblade clan. She knew it was him. Her former plaything, her former talisman, the one who promised her that the peach would be the last. And that promise slithered toward her across the map like a black snake. But that was later. First, Meyer. Technically, she's already been destroyed. The clan has been disbanded. Their lands have been seized. Her rank has been stripped. But Meyer is alive. And as long as she's alive, the loop isn't closed. Bek Sola returned to Baeko in the 13th month. not with an escort. Alone, on a weary horse. Jihun spotted her on the thermal scan a kilometer before the gates. A single sapphire dot. 18,000 drops. Unescorted. That could mean two things. Either she had betrayed the priestess and come to warn him, or she was carrying out her orders differently than expected. He waited by the kitchen. Fish. A knife. A familiar stance. Solya rode through the gates. She dismounted. She surveyed the courtyard. She saw 107 warriors at morning roll call. She saw the new armor from the Moonblade arsenal. She saw Dohi's catapults on the walls. Double-framed shields, smoke bombs and crates by the gate. Then she saw him. She approached, stood facing him, silently. He was cleaning the fish. She watched his hands. Then she said that the high priestess wanted to see him. He didn't look up. He asked why. Solya replied that the priestess knew. Not everything, but enough. She had plotted Beko's growth curve and overlaid it on the date of his arrival. The match was perfect. The priestess doesn't believe in coincidences. Jihun set down the knife. He wiped his hands. He looked at Solya. 3 seconds. A cold read. Her pulse was steady. Her shoulders were relaxed. She wasn't tense. She wasn't hostile. She hadn't come as an enemy. She'd come as... He couldn't quite tell. Something between an ally and an observer. He asked what she had told the priestess. Solya replied that she had gone to see Song Hua in person. She hadn't brought him along right away. She told the priestess that there was nothing in Beko but well-trained female warriors and a capable lieutenant. She said that the growth anomaly could be explained by the high concentration of demons in the wasteland and regular mop-up operations. She said that a supply porter is just a supply porter. Song Hua listened. She nodded. Then she said that Solya was lying, and she let her go.
Jihun remained silent.
Solya continued. She said that the priestess had given her 3 weeks. Then she would come herself. In person. To Beko. And then no lie would help. 140,000 drops of the Scarlet Throne. The priestess would see everything. Every thread of resonance. Every trace of doctrine. Every pattern woven into the warrior's azure. She'll see the black residue in his spine. She'll see the 27,000 hidden drops. She'll see everything. And then, either the dogma will collapse, or he will. Jihun ran his hand over the scar. He asked Solya why she had lied to the priestess, why she had bought him 3 weeks. Solya was silent for a long time. Then she said she had seen Beko's numbers from the very first day. She saw how 47 bronze warriors turned into a fighting machine. She saw how they killed the silver boar without suffering any losses. She saw how they crushed 100 gold warriors at the tournament. She has served Hyongran for 20 years. She commands the border inspection force. She knows that the borders are held with the blood of female warriors who are sent to their deaths because there is no strategy. Because every clan fights head-on. Because in 800 years, no one has learned to win without casualties. But he did. In 1 year. 47 disposable bronze-ranked fighters. 0 casualties. She said she didn't care about the dogma. She does care about the soldiers. The living soldiers. Jihun listened. He nodded. He asked what she wanted. Solya replied. She wants to be on the right side when everything changes. And she wants him not to be an idiot. 3 weeks. The priestess will arrive. By then he must either be safe or so strong that he doesn't need to be safe. He replied that there was a third option. Solya raised an eyebrow. He said that in 3 weeks, Han Yuanhua would no longer be the commander. And when the priestess arrives in Beko, she won't have time for a mere pack mule, because the sky will be ablaze in the west. Solya didn't understand. He didn't explain. 3 weeks. Jihun summoned the entire staff. Seryong, Dohi, Aryum, Hayun. And for the first time, he added a 5th. Bek Solya, Sapphire Tier. 18,000 drops. Border Inspector. She sat down in the wagon porter's cramped compartment and didn't flinch at the smell of straw. He laid out the plan. Han Yonhua's estate, the Red Chrysanthemum Clan. Amethyst tier. 47,000 drops. This isn't Meyer. Meyer was cocky and foolish. Yonhua is smart. Cautious. Her estate is a fortress. 200 female guards. Average rank? Silver 3. Commanders? Gold. Walls. Moats. Patrols. A head-on attack is impossible, even with Baiko's resources. 107 against 200. Silver 2 against Silver 3 with gold officers. The math isn't in their favor. Hain laid out the intelligence. Her network of informants had been working for 3 months. Yonhua Manor had one weakness: its water supply. It stood on high ground, beautiful and impregnable, but the water came from below, from 3 wells at the foot of the hill. Cut off the water, and in a week, 200 women would start drinking from puddles. Jihun shook his head. He said a siege would take months. They had 3 weeks. They needed another way. He looked at Aryum. Aryum closed her eyes and began to describe the terrain around the estate. Every rock, every ravine, every burrow. She had been there once. She had passed with a caravan 2 weeks ago. Once was enough. Jihong listened. The thermal imagery overlaid her words. He saw what he was looking for: an old drainage tunnel, the estate's sewer system. An exit in the ravine 400 paces from the wall, blocked, abandoned, but passable if cleared. Dohi could clear it overnight. He began to plan. Not an assault, a raid, quick, quiet, at night. The strike team would go through the tunnel inside. Simultaneously, a diversionary attack on the gates. Yonhua would throw forces toward the gates. The tunnel team would emerge inside. Chaos, panic, smoke grenades, darkness. And in the darkness, 47 Beko veterans who've spent half a year training to fight indoors. The pattern of night combat, instilled in each of them. Against 200 defenders who have never trained in the dark. Because no one in Hyongran trains in the dark. Why would they? The azure shines. The blade cuts. Line up and strike. Jihun smirked. 5,000 years of military history against 800. We'll be out in 12 days. Han Yonhua's estate stood on the hill like a crown on a dead man's head. White walls, blue roof tiles, laser lanterns around the perimeter, glowing with an even blue light. Beautiful. Behind these walls, Jihong had spent 3 months in a silk cage.
Behind these walls, he'd been wounded, and his wound had been bandaged with a handkerchief that smelled of peaches. Behind these walls, he'd been sold. He stood in a ravine 400 paces from the wall and gazed at the estate through the slit in his hood. Night. Moonless. Dohi cleared the tunnel in 6 hours, in silence, with a pickaxe and a stubbornness that Jihong had long since ceased to find surprising. The tunnel stank. Dampness, mold, dead rats. But passable. 2 abreast, just as Aram had said. He divided his forces. 60 female warriors at the gates. A show of force. Noise. Fire. Slingshots. Smoke bombs. Anything that would attract attention. Ha-In was in command. She was eager to join the tunnel group. She wanted to be inside when Yonhua fell. Jihun said no. They needed Ha-Yan on the outside, because it would be harder from the outside. The demonstration had to look like a real assault. If Yonhua suspected a diversion, she'd throw her forces inside, toward the tunnel, and everything will collapse. Ha-In knew Yonhua's tactics. She knew how she thought. She knew what triggers would make her believe the attack was real. Ha-In gritted her teeth and agreed.
47 veterans into the tunnel. The best. The first ones. Those who had been with him from the very beginning. Seryong is in command. Beside her is Do-hee with a bag of smoke grenades. Aryum with a mental map of the estate. And him. Jihun. For the first time in 13 months, he wasn't just an observer. He was heading inside. Wearing a supply officer's cloak, a knife on his belt, no armor. The 27,000 hidden drops in his spine are useless without hand-to-hand combat skills on par with the Azure warriors. He's not a fighter. He's headquarters. But headquarters must see the battlefield. Thermal markers at a distance provide a general picture. Up close, they reveal every shadow, every breath, every blind spot. 3 o'clock in the morning, the tunnel team has entered. The stench, the darkness. The warriors marched in silence, the pattern of a silent march. Jihun drilled it into them 2 weeks ago. Breathing steady, footsteps soft, blades secured so they wouldn't clang. 20 minutes through the tunnel, exit into the estate's basement. Arim whispered to turn right. Stairs, 2 flights, exit to the east wing. The guards' barracks were in the west wing. Yonhua's private quarters were in the central tower, 3rd floor. Jihun stopped the group at the basement exit. He closed his eyes. Thermal scan. The estate unfolded before him like a living map. 200 hotspots, most in the west wing. The barracks, they're asleep. Patrol, 4 points. 2 at the gates, 2 on the walls. And 1 point. Bright, dense. 47,000 drops. Central tower, 3rd floor. Not asleep. Yonhua wasn't asleep. She was sitting by the window. A warm drink. Maybe tea. Maybe wine. Alone. He opened his eyes and told Seryon it was time. At that moment, there was a loud bang outside. Ha-in had started. Sling stones struck the gates. Smoke bombs flew over the walls. Shouts. Signal horns. The azure lanterns on the walls flashed. Alarm. 200 female warriors leapt from their bunks. The west wing came to life. Hotheads surged toward the gates. Just like that. Exactly as he'd planned. Seryon led the 47 up through the basement. Quietly. Quickly. Dohi's smoke grenades flew into the corridors of the east wing. Smoke filled the passageways. Thick. Acidic. Lazuri's lanterns were useless in the smoke. The light scattered. Visibility was 0. The 47 Beko veterans moved through the smoke like fish in water. A pattern of night combat. They'd trained for 6 months. They'd fought blindfolded. They'd fought in the dark. They'd fought in the smoke. Each one knew where the wall was, where the corner was, where the step was. Arim had sketched the estate for them from memory, and they had memorized every turn. First contact. The Bako trio clashed with a quartet of guards in the 2nd floor hallway. Guards from the Silver Thur. In the smoke, with no visibility. They swung their blades blindly. The trio struck with precision. 3 blades, 3 hits, 4 guards on the floor. 10 seconds. Seryon led the main group up the central staircase toward the tower. Jihun followed behind her. The thermal marker showed the way. To the right, straight ahead. 2 guards around the corner. Seryon rounded the corner and struck before they could see her in the smoke. 3rd floor. The door to Yonhua's chambers. Oak. Reinforced with steel. The azure lock. An amethyst-level seal. Impossible to pick. Impossible to break down. Dohi approached the door and placed her palm against it. She smirked. She took a thin steel tube with a fuse out of her bag. She inserted it into the keyhole. She lit it. A quiet hiss. A bright flash. An oil bomb for locks. She'd come up with this yesterday. The lock burst open. The door swung wide. Han Yonhua stood in the middle of the room, fully armed for battle. Armor, 2 blades, amethyst arrow, 47,000 drops of azure. The mark burned with a violet flame. She was waiting. She knew. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she knew he would come. Jihun stepped out from behind Seryong's back. He removed his hood. Yonhua saw him. The mark of an empty vessel on her neck, the scar on her chest visible through the slit in her shirt. That very one, from the seal she had torn out 13 months ago. She said he had come. He replied that he had promised. She remembers the taste of a peach. Yonhua remembered. He saw from the thermal reading how her pulse fluttered. For a second. Then it steadied. She raised her blades. 47,000 drops. Against whom? Against a wagon driver with a knife? against gold and Setion with 9,400, against the 47 silvers behind him. Arithmetic. 47,000 against a combined total of 160,000. But Amethyst, in a confined space, is capable of killing 20 silvers before he stopped. Maybe 30. Jihun didn't want any casualties. Every death under his command seared at his nerves. A month of life for each one. He told Seryong to step back. Everyone, back. Just him and Yeonhwa. Seryong objected. He repeated himself. She retreated. The 47 veterans retreated behind the door. Jihun stood before Yeonhwa, a knife at his belt. 27,000 hidden drops, which he didn't know how to use in battle, which had been accumulating for 13 months, which burned his spine with a black cold. Yeonhwa struck. 47,000 drops in a single lunge. The blade sliced through the air, and Jihun was no longer there. He didn't understand how he dodged it. His body moved before his mind could think. The black cold in his spine exploded, not with pain, but with speed. 27,000 drops of hidden azure poured into his muscles, bones, and tendons. Not blue light, black. Yeonhwa froze for a split second. She saw it. Black azure on the body of an empty vessel. Impossible. Non-existent. He struck with a knife. Not like a warrior. Like a military intelligence operative. 3 points that a cold reading had revealed to him in 3 seconds while he was still standing at the door. The popliteal fossa, the right wrist, the neck. The knife entered the popliteal fossa. Yeonhwa collapsed to one knee. The blade fell from her right hand, which he had slashed on the way back. She blocked the third strike to her neck with her left blade. 47,000 versus 27,000. Her block sent him flying across the room. His back slammed into the wall. His ribs cracked. But Yeonhwa remained on one knee, her tendons severed and her wrist bleeding. She looked down at her leg, at the blood, at the empty vessel by the wall, at the black lines on his arms that were already fading. She said it was impossible. He stood up, spit out blood, replied that promises are never impossible. Seryong burst into the room. She disobeyed orders. 9,400 drops of golden tira, a blade to Yeonhwa's throat. 47 veterans behind her. Yeonhwa closed her eyes. She dropped her left blade. Metal clanged against the floor. A night raid on Han Yeonhwa's estate. 47 veterans entered through the drainage tunnel under the cover of Ha-in's show of force. A battle in the smoke. Jihun used black azure in combat for the first time and personally wounded Yeonhwa. She was defeated. Seryong and the 47 veterans secured the estate. The morning air over the red chrysanthemum estate smelled of cooled smoke and wet iron. Jihun stood on the balcony of the central tower and looked out at the courtyard. Below, 200 disarmed female guards sat in rows, hands on their knees, without armor. The 47 Beko veterans stood along the perimeter. 60 of Hayun's warriors entered through the gates once the battle inside had ended and took their positions along the walls. 107 against 200. Beko's casualties, 11 wounded. Not a single fatality. Not a single one. The nerve in his spine was intact. A black chill pulsed steadily. Down in the courtyard, Han Yeonhwa knelt. Former commander of the Red Chrysanthemum clan, Amethyst Archery Range, 47,000 drops. Her right knee was bandaged. Her wrist was in bandages. Her sword was broken, and the shards lay nearby on the stones. Seryong stood before her with her blade drawn. Gold one with 9,400 drops, awaiting orders. 47 warriors looked down on Yeonhwa. The very same 47 who, a year ago, had been bronze dust. Scraps, discarded bones. Now their markings glowed with silver and gold. And the woman kneeling before them was the one who had decided that the man in the silk cage was worth no more than 3 villages and a mine. Jihun came down, slowly. His ribs, still sore from Yeonhwa's blow, ached with every step, but he refused to wince. He crossed the courtyard. 200 captive female guards stared at the supply porter in his tattered cloak, unable to understand why everyone was parting to let him through. He stopped in front of Yonhua. She raised her head. Her face was pale but calm, beautiful. Just like 13 months ago in the arena. Just like when she tore the seal from his chest. She looked at the scar where his shirt was torn open, then at the brand of an empty vessel on his neck, then into his eyes. She said he had changed. He replied that he hadn't. She had simply never looked before. She asked what he would do. He remained silent. He looked to the right. On a small table by the wall lay a tray. On the tray was a peach. Fresh. Ripe. Juice oozing from the skin. Ha-in had found it in Yonhua's pantry and placed it there without being told. On her own initiative, Jihun picked up the peach. He turned it over in his hand. He brought it up to his face. He inhaled. The same scent. Sweet, warm, familiar. He put the peach back, without taking a bite. He turned to Yonhua. He told her that he had promised her that peach would be the last one she ate as commander. The promise was fulfilled. She looked at him, and for the first time in 13 months, he saw something on her thermal scan that he hadn't seen before. Fear. Real fear. Not feigned, not tactical. The primal fear of a person who realized that all her power was built on sand. He turned to Seryeon. He nodded. Seryeon announced before the ranks, "The Red Chrysanthemum clan has been seized by force. Commander Han Yonhua has been deposed. The lands, property, and warriors are now under Baekho's control." Yonhua listened. Every word fell on her like a stone. The clan she had built over 20 years. The lands for which she had bargained and schemed. Everything was gone in a single night. In a single battle. Because of a single man she had considered a plaything. The guards in the ranks remained silent. 200 warriors without a clan. Without a commander. Without a future. Seryeon offered them a choice. Leave as free women or stay and serve Baekho. 178 out of 200 stayed. Jihun wasn't surprised. They had seen what happened to the Moonblade after it was disbanded. Those who left became vagabonds. Those who stayed with Baekho thrived. The choice was obvious. By noon, the estate was operating under new command. Ha-in organized the sorting of the spoils. Du-hee was already in the workshop. Aryum was patrolling the grounds, memorizing every corner. Jihun sat in Yonhua's former office, staring at the map of Hyungran on the wall. A large map, a detailed one. The 9 territories of the 9 Scarlet clans. The capital, Chongryon, in the center. The Hall of Chronicles. The wasteland of the Grey Crows to the north. And the west. The mountains to the west. Beyond which, according to rumors, there is nothing but fog. He looked west, and the black chill down his spine pulsed differently. Not smoothly. Jerky, as if answering someone's call. The door opened. Seryeon entered. She stopped in the doorway. She said they already knew about it in Chongryong Square. The messengers had ridden off that morning. By evening, the news would reach the council. Baekho had captured the second clan. A small border garrison had wiped out the Moonblade and the Red Chrysanthemum in half a year. A small garrison led by a man. She paused and added that the High Priestess was already on her way. Not in 3 weeks. Right now. Baek Sola had sent word via a pigeon. Sonhua had left the capital with her personal guard. 140,000 drops of the Red Throne and 30 golden warriors. She was heading to Baekho. Jihun nodded. He stood up. He walked over to the window. He looked up at the sky. Clear, blue, peaceful. He said, "Let her go." He's waiting. Seryeon approached and stood beside him. She asked quietly, "Is he afraid?" He replied, "No." Songhua, the Red Tyrant. 140,000 drops. Keeper of the Hall of Chronicles. Keeper of the dogma. She'll see him and realize that the dogma is a lie. 800 years of lies. The question is what she'll do about it. Will she destroy him to preserve the lie? Or will she accept the truth and allow the world to change? He didn't know the answer, but he knew he was ready for either outcome. 3 hours later, High Priestess Sonhua rode through the gates of the former Red Chrysanthemum estate. 30 golden warriors in immaculate armor. Horses in battle caparisons. The banners of the Hall of Chronicles. And she, small, old, as withered as a tree root. The mark on her wrist burned with a crimson flame so bright that the Beko warriors in the courtyard took 2 steps back. 140,000 drops. The pressure of the azure settled on the estate like a stone slab. Breathing grew heavier. Jihun stood in the courtyard, without a cloak, without a hood. For the first time in 13 months, he wasn't hiding. A simple shirt, a knife at his belt, the brand of an empty vessel on his neck, a scar on his chest. Sonhua dismounted. She walked across the courtyard, past the ranks of Beko, past the disarmed female guards, past Seryong, who stood with a sword in her hand and a mark burning with gold, past everyone, straight toward him. She stopped 2 steps away, a small old woman with eyes that had seen it all. 140,000 drops. Jihun felt her azure pass right through him. Not a strike, a scan. She was reading his body like an open book. His spine, the black residue. 27,000 invisible drops. The strategist's seal emerging through the brand of the empty vessel like ink through wet paper. Resonant threads stretching from him to every female warrior within a radius of 100 steps. Command links. Doctrine. Everything. She saw everything. She was silent for a long time. Then she uttered the words he had been waiting for. She said that he should not exist. He replied that he did exist. She said that the dogma states that men are empty. He replied that the dogma lies. And they both know it. Sonhua was silent. 10 seconds. 20. 30. 140,000 drops pressed down on the square like a mountain. Jihun stood firm. The 27,000 within him held him steady. Black azure against scarlet. The silence became a ringing. And then the sky burst into flame. Not a metaphor, not a metaphor. The western horizon flared scarlet, from edge to edge. The glow was so bright that the shadows in the courtyard darted and fell in the opposite direction, as if the sun had risen in the west. The warrior women on the walls screamed. The golden guards of Sonhua drew their blades. The veteran warriors of Beko turned toward the walls. Bells rang out in the distant capital. An alarm. Jihun stared at the glow. A black chill roared down his spine. It didn't pulse. It roared, as if it were answering. As if someone on the other side of the mountains were calling to him. The thermal imaging showed the impossible. To the west, beyond the mountains, a mass was moving. Enormous. Scorching. Thousands of dots. Tens of thousands. An army. The banners on the thermal scan were black. The seals on them pulsed with the same black cold as the sensation in his spine. He knew these seals. He'd never seen them, but he knew them. The way one knows one's own name. The strategist's seal. Not just one, thousands. An army led by the one who awoke first. The first strategist. And he wasn't going to bargain. Not to negotiate. He was going to take it. Sonhua stared at the glow. For the first time during their entire encounter, her expression changed. The priestess of the Red Throne, with 140,000 drops, turned pale. She turned to Jihun. Her eyes were wide open. She understood. Everything. All at once. The dogma. The black order of strategists. 800 years of lies. And what was coming from the west? She asked how many. He closed his eyes. The thermal scanner was counting. He opened them. He answered. Many. She asked if he could. He understood the question. Could he do to Hyonggran's army what he had done to the 47 female warriors of Beko? Could he transform a 14th century feudal army into a 21st century war machine? He looked at his hands, at the black lines that were visible beneath his skin and would no longer fade, at the mark that was glowing on his wrist for the first time in his life. Not blue, not scarlet, black. He didn't answer. He turned to Seryong. She stood beside him, a sword in her hand, her golden mark glowing. 47 veterans behind her, 60 hind warriors on the walls, 178 former guards in the courtyard, Beksola somewhere at the entrance, 18,000 sapphire drops, all his. Everyone who had grown up under his command, under his doctrine, under his invisible hand. He ran his palm over the scar at the one approaching from the other side of the ridge with an army capable of swallowing all of Hyungran. He spoke a single sentence, softly, steadily, just like all his orders. He said he was too late. He had wanted to kill Yeonhwa first. Then he turned to Seonhwa. He looked her in the eyes. 140,000 drops against 27,000. Scarlet against black. The guardian of the dogma against the proof that the dogma is dead. And he said they had little time, but it would be enough. Songhwa looked at him, at the brand, at the black mark, at the glow. At the army of 47 warriors who, over the course of a year, had gone from trash to gold under the command of a man whom her world had considered an empty vessel. She closed her eyes. She opened them. And for the first time in 800 years, High Priestess Hyungran bowed her head before a man. Not deeply, barely noticeably, but the 30 gold guards from her personal guard saw it, and the 47 veterans saw it, and Yoon Se-ryong saw it. She looked at Jihun, and in her eyes was everything that words could not contain. He nodded to her, just like the first time on the watchtower after the boar. Just like after the tournament. He simply nodded.
Then he turned west and walked toward the wall. To climb, to look, to assess, to do what he did better than anyone in both worlds. The war was beginning.